Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about what if Deku was stranded in space. If you guys enjoy this movie, comment down below and let me know before I start. Please do support for more awesome content and leave a like, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel and also share this video with your friends and check out the description in my playlist. The author of the story CloudsComeDown from 𝐴3. So let's start the video. Yamada Hisashi always liked to brag about how well behaved his two children are. Besides the general small mishaps that tend to happen when one is raising two preteens in the same house. This, as well as the frankly a bit cocky assurance to his parents the day before when they were prepping for their flight, is seriously making him regret ever learning to talk. The morning had started out fine, of course, as all catastrophes do. Izuku and Yuuga were in the ship's sleeping quarters, supposedly suffering from jet lag, and Hisashi was having a nice time double-checking their supplies and then rearranging their emergency travel packs, just in case. But then he decides he needs to get some rest himself before he passes out from sheer anxiety, before they even get to the vacation colony his parents are staying on. He turns the spacecraft on autopilot and wakes Yuuga, the least likely to try something while he sleeps, or so he thought. It seems like no time has passed at all from when he finally laid his head onto his pillow that he's being thrown out of his bed pod and across the room, hitting his head on a corner of an adjacent pod. The first thing he does after his conscious returns and his vision clears is try and find Izuku, who should have been sleeping in the pod he just hit his head on. It's empty, and he almost immediately locks on to what they must have done while he was resting. He grabs onto the pod to support himself as he tries to stumble to the sliding door. He needs to get to his kids. It doesn't matter what the hell they did or how much his head is swimming, making him wonder how much of his lack of balance is from the concussion he probably has, and how much is from the ship's gravity trying to keep working as it tumbles through space at a higher speed than it was made to go as a cruise shuttle. The door slides open, and he has to catch himself with his hands as he's slammed into the floor again by the tilting ship. He's almost to the control room, just a few more feet in front of him, even though his head screams from bright fluorescent lights above him and his eyes refuse to focus. He manages to make it to the door without bashing his head on anything else. His hand slams urgently onto the lock pad, but the door continues to stay shut. Either the two of them had figured out how to change the lock, or the impact of whatever had made the ship go out of control had jammed it. He's pretty sure they can't read common well enough to figure out the locking mechanisms, so that leaves him with the jammed option. As if his luck wasn't already abysmal as it is. There should be a crowbar in the storage room, so he turns and heads that way. It's a little easier since it's closer to the piloting room, but still a nightmare for his head to deal with at the moment. Thankfully, the door opens without issue, and he can reach into the cubby he shoved it in when he was organizing earlier and grab the crowbar without issues. The walk back seems even worse than the walk there, and he almost loses his breakfast less than halfway. It takes almost all of his concentration and strength to ram the sharp bit of the bar, though the thin crack in the side of the door. He pulls himself back before ramming all his body weight onto it, causing the door to bend in a little, but it still doesn't open, so he pulls himself back again. And again, and again, until whatever was locking it finally snaps, and he is finally able to push the door open. He immediately locks his eyes onto his children huddled into the corner under the control panel. Mostly uninjured it seems, though only Izuku manages to look back up at him. Hopefully that's just because Yuuga is stressed, and not because they're unconscious. He launches himself across the room as quickly as he can with the way the ship keeps tilting like an ocean-bound ship through deep waves. He falls onto his knees in front of them and pulls them into his chest. He can feel Izuku's tears soaking up into the fabric of his shirt, but he ignores it, cradling them with the last of the strength he has left as the adrenaline starts to fade. Yuuga's ragged breathing and soft hiccups are worrying, but at least it means they're still alive for the time being. He raises his head to look out the pilot window, watching the blur of distant lights pass as he continues to spin out of control around them, solidifying their fate. His head falls back down to his children's, and he can feel himself starting to lose consciousness. The last thing he hears is Izuku's broken voice, desperately apologizing, and he wants to cry, because this was never supposed to be how it ended. The children he took in and raised since they were babies didn't deserve the fate of watching their only parent lose consciousness as they're thrown into the void of space, covered in the blood of their dying parent, knowing they'll never be making it home. He takes one more shuddering breath before his vision finally turns black and his hearing starts fading as well. "I'm so sorry." The first thing Hisashi registers when he wakes up is the fact that he did, in fact, not succumb to his head injury in his sleep. The second thing he registers is the unimaginable amount of pain his body is in right now. Expectedly, the majority of the pain is centered in his head, aching and burning deep in all the places he would much rather not have any such sensations in. He reaches his hands up to cradle his skull, and his hands meet bandages. He's still on the ship, which is still spinning since there's no atmosphere in space to slow their movement. So the kids must have done it while he was out. Trying to sit up is found to be futile as a hand, smaller than his own, reaches out to his chest and pushes him back down to the cushions of his sleep pod. Oh, he hadn't realized any of his kids were here watching him since the eye facing them was covered in bandages as well for some reason. He doesn't remember injuring it at any point, so it was probably just to help hold down the gauze on his forehead. The face of his youngest child leans over him before he can even try to turn his head. His eyes are red, probably from crying, which makes sense since they all thought they were about to die. Which is still an option on the table, but at least now they have some more time together before that. Then, Izuku pulls his head back, the bit of his mouth that he could see before it was entirely gone from his vision, looking like it was about to say something. But he doesn't hear anything but a quiet rumble, meaning they took his hearing aids. He's not sure why they didn't let him at least keep the right one since there weren't any bandages over it. But he's much too exhausted, both mentally and physically, to try and argue about that right now. Arms are suddenly thrown around him, shocking him out of his thoughts as he rests a hand on what he now recognizes as Yuuga's blonde hair. Tears are soaking into his shirt again, but he can't find it in him to mind as another head is rested on him. Izuku's untamable green hair tickling his neck from when it lay on his shoulder. He reaches his other hand up to rest on his head as well, running his fingers through their hair, tears welling up in his eyes. He hopes this won't be the last time he's able to comfort them. He continues to pet them until Yuuga suddenly shifts to pull back out of the pod, taking Izuku's fluffy head with them. He thinks it's a little strange that Yuuga would be the first to move since they're usually the one that needs cuddles the most after stressful situations happen, but then again, this is a bit more than just a stressful situation. The two return pretty quickly, and Hisashi is relieved to have one of his hearing aids passed back to him. They help him sit up, and he puts it on, relishing in regaining his ability to hear. Even though he technically doesn't need it since both of his kids know how to sign, it's still comforting to have. Especially in this ship, he barely knows with no guarantee of their safety. Yuuga clears their throat and holds up a colorful plastic-wrapped bar and tries to smile at him. "We have obtained a super shiny space bar for your highness whilst thou were sleeping." He holds it out to Hisashi like a messenger holding out a scroll to a king and gives him a short bow after he takes it. Izuku stands beside him, grinning a bit at his siblings' attempt to bring the mood up. He can still remember the way he used to act like that all the time when they were kids. It makes him feel a bit better. He holds out a water bottle to his dad, and as he inevitably decides to play along. "And I, the mighty Izuku," he places a hand on his chest, as if he were very full of himself, "have brought upon you the most sparkliest of life elixirs, just for you." Hisashi grabs the water bottle with a smirk and places a bruised hand onto his own chest. "Well, I thank you, Sir Izuku. I have been searching long and hard for such a beverage as this," he says as he holds up the bottle above his head, hand still on his chest. "At least if he dies now, he dies a king, right?" "Ha." Yuuga sits beside him on the bed, face suddenly downcast. Izuku stands beside him, grimacing, and Hisashi makes sure to keep his face blank as he takes a bite of his relatively bland nutrition bar. He's pretty sure he already knows where this is going anyway. Izuku speaks first, of course, as he is the more confident of the two. "We wanted to try flying the ship," he explains, quietly. "We figured out how to turn the autopilot off and on again when you let us sit beside you when you were piloting. So we thought it would be fine if we got just a little bit off course." It was fine for a while. Yuuga steps in this time, staring at the floor while he says it. "But then we got too far from the direction we were going, and we had to try and turn around. We spent a while trying to turn, but by the time we had figured it out, we had been rammed into by something. I think it was a small asteroid, since that's the direction we had been headed towards at the time." Izuku chimes in, Yuuga nodding in agreement from beside him. Hisashi nods in understanding. "Well, this is unfortunate." An understatement about a mile long, really, he thinks as he claps his hands together. "But unfortunately, there's nothing we can do about it now. All we can do is plan ahead for what we're going to do next. Would one of you help me up?" I need to take in the damages before we go around trying to plan anything." "Of course," yells Izuku at the same time Yuuga tries to remind him of his injuries. No matter though, the longer amount of time they spend wasting, the deeper the shit they're going to be rolling in. So, Hisashi starts as Izuku puts an arm around him for support. "How long have I been out?" Despite being reluctant for Hisashi to even be up, Yuuga does end up helping him to walk to the piloting room, since the shifting of the ground keeps making it hard to even stand at times, and neither kids want their father to get any more injured than he already is. It takes an extra couple seconds than it would have if the ship wasn't trying to smack them into the walls, but eventually they make it over unharmed. The door is still open and crumpled from when Hisashi smashed it in about 12 hours ago, which is way longer than he would have liked for Izuku and Yuuga to be alone without him there and available to help them. They enter and Hisashi hastily starts examining the control booth. It appears that the crew's thrusters are offline, which definitely is not good for them, but thankfully, that seems to be the majority of the ship's problems. The outside of the ship obtained only minor fractures, and there's no holes in any of the important parts of the walls, so they're good on oxygen for the time being. The gravity is working well, or about as well it can, with the ship actively cosplaying as a fidget spinner. However, a problem quickly arises the moment he pulls up the map. Not only are they way out of the range of Earth's solar system and territory, but they're also unnervingly close to the borders of the Galactic Space Union's territory. Which is bad for him and his kids, because, unfortunately, the space government was still very hostile with their opinions of mankind. Which is pretty understandable considering what they did to the first people to encounter them. But to be fair, the aliens attacked first, and with clear intent of harm at that. All invaders were immediately disposed of in one of the shortest wars Earth had ever partaken in. Then, after the invaders were defeated, it was extremely easy to take over the alien ships and reforge their own with the new materials and designs, creating a boom in the space travel business. Now Earth has the ability to do just about all the other space-faring species can. Which, of course, the space government does not like. So it's illegal for any humans to enter their space territory now. No matter the reason, no exceptions. Fuck. He's got to get the ship turned around before they pass through that property line. Unfortunately, with how far they've gotten, their only option of getting home without passing that boundary is through space warping. Hopefully, it'll all go well, and he'll only have to use it once. If his aim were to miss, then they'd be stuck in space with no fuel to get them anywhere, much less home. He turns back around to face the kids, who are looking at him with expectant faces. He sucks in a breath and starts talking. "The ship's going to have to warp if we want to have even a chance at getting home. Which means the two of you are going to have to be knocked out by the ship's hibernation system for a little while, you dig? Don't worry about anything happening while you're out. The ship will be set to wake us if anything changes." The two of them look at each other for a bit, nodding like they're actually going over it with the other, even though they weren't outwardly saying anything. Internally, Hisashi guiltily wishes they would hurry it up, before they run out of time and pass through the boundaries. However, Hisashi could never stifle his kids' spirits, even when their actions are extremely inconvenient to him and their way of life. They turn back to him and nod simultaneously, looking back at him with solemn determination painted on their faces. They say nothing at all, but Hisashi knows they're scared, and he scoops them up in his arms to comfort them. He wishes he never took that nap. If he hadn't decided to work himself to the bone over what was probably nothing, then his children wouldn't be fearing for their lives in the middle of space. He grabs them by the shoulders and leads them through the ship, ignoring his unsteadiness and spinning vision in favor of being strong for them, so they wouldn't be as worried. The three of them enter the sleeping chambers, and they each crawl into their separate bed pods. He closes the lids from the top down and latches it manually. Technically, he doesn't have to since the ship can do it itself. But Hisashi isn't about to be taking any chances. He presses the button on the side panel that is blankly labeled Force Time Sleep, and then selects within notice. The labels don't really make sense to Hisashi, but it's what he was told to do in case of needing to use the warp sequence, which he now will do to his own irresponsibility. He sets up his own bed as well, but doesn't get in it yet, since he still needs to set the countdown on the ship. After he presses the button, he'll have about 30 seconds to make it from the control room to his bed, which isn't nearly enough time with how the ground continues to tilt and his eyes continue to unfocus themselves, but he doesn't get a choice in the matter. It's a long walk back to the control room and falls over again on the way, narrowly avoiding bashing his head open on the tiles for the second time in the last 24 hours. He grips the walls for support and shuffles to the leftmost side of the panel. He selects his destination as Earth and hopes desperately that the flipping motions of the ship won't throw off their direction too badly. He sets the countdown and any specific instructions for waking before shuffling as closely to the door as he can while still being able to reach the controls. He presses the countdown and immediately sprints to the door. The ground tilts, and he almost goes flying several times over in the span of a second. But he perseveres and continues to dash back to his pod. In no less than 26 seconds, he's locked into his pod, and he can feel the gas from the hidden vents filtering in. There's a brief rumble heard and felt in the background of his mind, but before he can think much of it, he's out. The moment the pod doors flew open with a jerk that makes the sleeping humans inside them get thrown to the floor, it was clear that something went wrong. 𝐻𝐻𝐸 groans and pulls himself up and grabs onto the windowsill to look out of it. 𝗵𝗃𝗏. The ship isn't spinning much anymore, so it is very easy to find the culprit of their sudden stop. A large ship, entirely foreign to him, and now donning a space cruise ship-sized dent right in the side of its hull. It's emitting bright red emergency lights, which means the oxygen layer of the foreign ship has been breached. As 𝐻𝐻𝐸 has learned previously from the space manuals he read back at piloting Ed on Earth. Great. Now not only are they criminals for trespassing, but they're also about to be the cause of several horrible, probably painful, deaths. Murder and trespassing. Not a good combination of crimes when your species as a whole is already considered to be savages. This is about as bad as that warp could have gone, he thinks miserably. Now the ship barely has enough fuel left to function. Unless he uses the emergency backup supply, which this definitely is, so 𝐻𝐻𝐸 thinks it's probably warranted. He hears Izuku and Yuuga groan from behind him and quickly turns back around to face them, stubbornly ignoring the way his head swims with the action. The pair were sprawled out with their arms tossed randomly about them, or covering their eyes to shield them from the light. Mood. 𝐻𝐻𝐸 hurries over to them, the movement being much easier now that the floor wasn't shifting so horribly. He scoops the two of them into his arms and Yuuga squints up at him tiredly. "Did we make it back?" he asks, making 𝐻𝐻𝐸's heart instantly crumble and die where it sits. "No, we didn't," he mumbles, voice cracking a little in the middle of the statement, and Yuuga's head immediately drops again. 𝐻𝐻𝐸's shoulders droop with guilt before he straightens himself. This might be the second time now that 𝐻𝐻𝐸 has failed his kids, but he's going to make sure it's not the last. He lets go of the children, and, when they don't immediately drop to the floor, he stands, bracing himself once more onto the nearest wall. The two watch him as he leaves, but no one says anything. 𝐻𝐻𝐸 makes his way to stand in front of the controls again and opens the radar map. They were unfortunately thrown in the opposite direction of their home planet. But they also weren't near the boundaries of the HPSC at all, so at least that's only one crime committed. He can cross out trespassing from his resume for the time being. He pulls up the search tab and locates the nearest planet to them with a breathable atmosphere. An escape planet if his space terms were to be believed. If 𝐻𝐻𝐸 couldn't get them back to Earth, then he was at least going to make it so they could survive for as long as possible. He selects the planet as a desired destination, but doesn't press the warp button. He hasn't prepared the children yet. He feels his body going through the motions of adding about half of their emergency supply of fuel to the tanks, though he can barely even register it. His mind shrouded by a thick fog that leaves him feeling vaguely empty. He sets the canister by the wall of the storage room and heads back towards the sleeping quarters. When he walks back in, he can see them curled up where he left them on the floor. Izuku's too busy silently crying to notice him enter, but Yuuga catches sight of him almost instantly. Their eyes are puffy, but not leaking like their brothers. They look at him in concern and shock, and in the back of his mind, he wonders how his face must look at the moment. Given the kid's expression, probably not very good. He clears his throat, both to get Izuku's attention, and also just because he had to with how dry his mouth is. He wonders how long the warp lasted. Maybe he should make them drink something before they have to go down again. "We are going to have to warp again," 𝐻𝐻𝐸 says, straightforwardly. How else is he to speak now, when his head feels like it's stuffed with cotton, and he can barely stand on his own 2 feet? "You two are both going to have something to eat and drink, and do whatever else you have to do for now, okay?" The two stall for a second, but after a second they both nod, slowly. 𝐻𝐻𝐸 ushers them up, and in record time they're ready to head off again. This time towards a planet 𝐻𝐻𝐸 has never even heard of before now. He hopes there's life there, and he isn't about to blast his children onto an empty rock for them to slowly starve to death in the middle of nowhere. He glances out the window once more as he heads back to the piloting booth. The foreign ship's lights are still flickering, meaning there must still be oxygen since it would have stopped if it had all gone out already. So hopefully the hole was only small, and they'll be able to patch it up themselves before they all suffocate to death. Optimistic thoughts. A quick walk, and he's pressing the button again and rushing back to his bed. It only takes him 19 seconds to get back to the pod this time. He closes the lid and tries to mentally prepare himself to land this thing when he next awakes. He knows he won't be ready. His awakening is gentle this time, and he can hear the lids of his children's pods opening from across the room. He hops out of bed and rubs at his one available eye to try and wake himself up. His ear hurts, and he suddenly wishes he had remembered to take it out before he had himself knocked out. He stumbles over to where the children are crawling out of their own beds and gives them a little shake. Now is not the time to be groggy. Despite the calm atmosphere, their peril isn't over yet. Start packing, he says firmly, and gives them another little shake. Their eyes slowly begin sharpening again. We're going to be landing soon, and we're not going to have much time to pack up and grab stuff before we'll have to evacuate the area. Our landing isn't going to be very clean, and after warping 2 times in quick recession, the ship's engine core is going to be at extreme risk of exploding for another 48 hours from when we land till the eventually core cools. They both nod, and he pulls them both to their feet before heading to the control box for the last time. He needs to start their landing now before gravity starts to take matters into its own hands. Not only that, but it also looks like their oxygen is getting a bit too low. That explains some of his lightheadedness. He can hear Izuku and Yuuga running around and breathing heavily from somewhere behind him, and the sound of heavy objects being loudly stacked against each other makes his head start to ache. Hisashi is proud of how quickly they decided to listen to him, even though the situation is probably so hard for them to even process. He presses the start button on the manual flight keys and grabs one of the steering gears with his right hand. Let's see how well this can land with one of its thrusters gone. As soon as the clouds break and Hisashi can see the surface, he starts slowing the ship's descent as he searches for a good landing place. He glides over a seemingly endless mass of trees and considers just crushing a couple and landing anyway there, but he knows that wouldn't be a good idea for several reasons. Thankfully, his patience is soon rewarded as a large span of grass pops out from behind the tree line, and he quickly starts making the correct adjustments to land. He reaches the beginning of the field and does a loop around to sit the ship, so it's facing the forest, and slowly brings the ship down to a relatively gentle stop. He hears Izuku and Yuuga laughing from within the corridors of the storage lockers, and can't stop himself from laughing a bit himself, albeit a bit more hysterically than the others. The scenario still isn't the best, but it's not the worst either. They're all safe for now, and hopefully, they'll be able to thrive on this foreign planet. The map summary said the planet was unoccupied, so at the very least, they're not going to be caught rooting around by angry natives of the planet. He's not sure he could fight them off in his current state. Honestly, he's surprised he even managed to operate the ship thus far. He stumbles out of the pilot's seat and makes his way through the still broken door, immediately getting pounced on by a green and blonde blur. They cling to him and his shirt, and he has to put a hand on the doorframe to keep himself from toppling over, his other arm moving to rest on their backs. He gives them a tight squeeze before he straightens his back, patting them to move off. He grins at them, as if they were about to go camping or something instead of being stranded. Did you two pack everything into those bags I told you about before we left? They both nod. Yeah, we also put everything but the bags we aren't going to be carrying into this fold-up wagon thing we found in one of the cubbies, says Izuku, who points to where a bright red thick-clothed wagon sits by the ship's entranceway. Great. That'll save us some time for sure, Hisashi says, face pulled up into his trademark grin. He imagines the look is a bit obscured by the mess of bandages he'll need to redo later and the unfocusedness in his eye. But it's at least more convincing than it was earlier, probably. Put your backpacks or whatever on and let's get going. Where'd you kids put mine anyway? They lead him to the spot just behind the wagon, which is literally stuffed to the brim, and he quickly spots the kids' bags and his own backpack. Izuku's bag is a dark green fabric to match his eyes, and only has one strap that he throws over one shoulder, so he looks like a kid in an adventure novel. Yuuga's is basically just a big purse, and is absolutely drowned in glitter, which he can see has already covered the ground beneath it. They put theirs on the same way as Izuku. His own bag is much bigger than the kids' since he himself had a much larger frame. Despite them not even being that young, They're already 12, just a bit small. The bag is a basic brown color and is made of fabric just like the others. He pulls it on, feeling himself get a little dizzy from having to reach down to grab it, but he powers through. He sidesteps the kids and picks up the handle of the wagon. He doesn't have time to check, so he's just going to hope they got all the important stuff already in there. He presses his hand to the scanner, and the entrance door slides open with a loud swoop. He steps out first and takes a quick peek at their surroundings. Looks pretty clear so far. He waves a hand for the kids to follow him. Come on, I'll be leader. They follow behind him obediently, and he makes quick work of walking into the trees, counting the number of steps he takes. He keeps his one good ear out for the sound of any twigs breaking or bark scratching. This planet is big enough and close enough looking in comparison to Earth that he already knows there has to be some sort of big predatory animal here somewhere, and he's not about to let some alien tiger maul his kids because he wasn't paying attention. He glances back at them a few times to make sure they were still okay and following him. He continues to keep an eye on their surroundings as he continues to keep count and eventually stops after what he thinks is 30 minutes of walking. The glass of his watch broke in a way that didn't let him see the clock hands anymore, so he has no way of knowing for the time being. After stopping, he turns his body around to face them. He notes worriedly how exhausted they look, but he knows there's no time for rest yet. They have no shelter and no idea of this planet and how its predators or daylight cycle works. He speaks to them gently, hoping they can hear his concern and don't think he's ignoring their current states. The first thing we need to do now is find a clean water source, so set up camp near. So keep an eye out as we walk from now until we find some. If it starts getting dark and we still haven't found water, then we'll set up a temporary base and continue looking in the morning. Any questions? 𝐸𝐸 raises their hand. Yes, 𝐸𝐸. They point to a largish creek with thin red shoots growing from the sides like water reeds about 10 feet to the right of them that he had completely missed somehow. Is that a clean water source? They ask, cheeky look giving away the lack of seriousness in the question. 𝐬𝐻𝐸 stares at it for a second before turning back to the kids, where both of them look like they are trying very hard not to laugh at his lack of awareness. Only 𝐸𝐸 is somewhat succeeding in this. It is possible that it is, but I'll need to test it first, just in case. You two stay here for a second. He points at their feet, trying to rein back in his dignity. He walks over to sit by the edge of the water and pulls the water testing kit he bought before their trip out of his backpack. He takes several samples before standing and making his way back to his small group. Izuku grins at him. So, is it clean enough? He asks. He flicks his son's forehead for his antics. I don't know yet, Izu. We'll have to wait and see what the results are in a minute. In the meantime, the shadows coming off these trees are making me think it's getting pretty late into the afternoon already, so we should start setting up camp regardless. 𝐬𝐻𝐸 says with a gesture to where a very large mound of rock and dirt sits about half a dozen meters away from them, looking like a giant horizontal spike jutting out of the ground. Maybe it was caused by an earthquake or something. 𝐬𝐻𝐸 hopes those aren't too common here, or they're going to have a bad time in this forest later on. The two kids nod and voice their agreement. Got it. Okay. He leads them over to the rock, and the kids begin working on getting the tent figured out. 𝐬𝐻𝐸 starts drilling small but deep holes into the ground around them with a tool that looks very similar to a very large corkscrew, to put up some wooden poles for a fence. He makes them almost all the way around in a circle, with a small area without the holes, for a gate to be placed. It leaves them with a good amount of space for them to move around and to build a nice fire pit soon. Izuku and 𝐸𝐸 have finished putting up the tent by the time he's done, so they work together collecting branches, tearing away any extra twiggy bits attached to them, and pressing them into the hole, tying them to the ones beside them with a thin rope from the wagon. They have to take several breaks throughout the task for resting, changing out of their gross space suits, and for 𝐬𝐻𝐸 to redress his head wound. At some point 𝐸𝐸 asks if he knew if the creek water was clean yet, and he digs the device out of his pocket to check. It is, more so than he thought it would be, even. It'll still need to be purified for drinking purposes, but they might be able to use it the way it is for bathing or whatever. Eventually, they have the fence entirely put up, mostly stable all the way around, and 𝐬𝐻𝐸 attaches the gate door they made to one of the side walls. He uses some nails and extra branches to make a sort of sliding lock, so it can't be opened from the outside. He'll have to remember to replace the ropes on the fence bit with boards at a later date so it's sturdier. By the time everything is attached and finished, 𝐬𝐻𝐸 feels like his head is going to melt right off his body. his legs shaky despite his usual daily runs and exercise routine. Several hours have passed, which he is now sure of since he took the glass off his watch before they started building, and he can't wait to pass out for the night. The three of them lay a sheet over what's left in the wagon and weigh down the flaps with a couple big rocks to keep any foraging animals out. And soon they have congregated themselves into the tent and zipped the flap shut. 𝐻𝐻𝐸 can visually see that they are just as tired as he is, so he does his best to help them out as they get ready for bed. He lays all their sleeping bags out onto the ground after placing a thin mat down for cushioning, as Izuku pulls their blankets out of everyone's clothes bags that they had taken out of the wagon earlier. Soon they're snuggled up beside each other, with 𝐻𝐻𝐸 being the one furthest from the tent wall despite having his hearing aids out and Izuku in the middle. 𝐻𝐻𝐸, despite being exhausted, can't keep the sad smile off his face as he slips into unconsciousness, knowing his children are still with him, even now, on this unfamiliar planet. 𝐻𝐻𝐸 wakes in the morning to the sound of silence and is confused as to where he is until he remembers and pulls his hearing aids out from his bag. He's going to have to find a way to charge these soon. He puts them on and slowly tunes into the sound of rocks toppling against each other and Izuku yelling at Yuuga to stop digging so slowly and help him pick up this rock. He's almost concerned for a brief moment until he remembers overhearing the two's discussion the evening before and chooses to ignore it for the time being. They're old enough to play with dirt and rocks, so as long as they don't try and light it themselves, there's not much reason for worry. The task needed to be done either way, and 𝐻𝐻𝐸's pretty sure building a fire pit would be a tad too straining for him with concussion. He already pushed it constructing the fence yesterday. His head still feels stuffy. Even so, 𝐻𝐻𝐸's not about to let his kids do all the work and laze around all day. There's always something that needs to be done. He just needs to find one that's less active and more sitting. He could set up a couple traps for some smaller animals maybe. It's important to have access to food later, and it would be nice if they could save up their supplies just in case. Sounds good then. He braces himself on his knees as he pushes himself up and hisses at the sound of his hips popping. His 26 years of life is starting to feel a lot more like 50 these days. He even has the bad eyesight and hearing to go with it. His eyes sting at the thought, and he's reminded that he's had his contacts in this whole time. He takes them out and throws them into the corner of the tent since they're useless to him now. He's going to have to get used to wearing his glasses again because his eyesight is way too bad without them. He thinks to himself as he digs their case out of his clothes bag. He was seriously hoping not to need them, but a few pairs of contacts aren't going to last him forever. It doesn't take him too long to make his way out of the tent after regaining his vision, and he gets to work finding some twine to tie some sticks together. He only knows how to build maybe 2 types of traps, 3 if you count the fish ones kids like to make to catch small fish. He can use those small fish as bait for bigger fish later, so he's definitely counting it. He waves at the kids as he walks by them towards the gate and smiles when they wave back. They don't pay too much attention though, apparently very dedicated to their craft at the moment. If he didn't have his own tendencies of locking into things, he'd probably be a little offended. Nonetheless, he starts looking for a good place for a trap to be laid, finding a natural walking path, and gets to work. The trap is a simple drop stick one with a trip wire inside to trigger it, and a couple cylindrical rocks tied to the top for weight. Not the most effective, but he doesn't have the skills for much better, so it'll have to do. He makes a second one a bit further down the path before his head starts to hurt more intensely again, and he heads back to the camp for a break. Izuku and Yuuga have already finished placing most of the rocks needed and have started clearing out space around the pit to avoid catching anything on fire. Yuuga seems to be struggling a bit, and it's clear that they both need a break as well with how sweaty they are, and Izuku keeps shifting around like he needs to pee. Which, to be honest, fair. It's probably been a while since they last took a break. 𝐻𝐻𝐸 whistles for attention, 2 heads flying up to meet his gaze, and he clears his throat before speaking loudly. Okay, so first things first. Thank you kiddos for building that rad-looking fire pit while I was busy. Secondly, it's break time now. Go take care of anything you need to do. Feel free to wash off in the creek if you have to. We're all pretty gross by now. He brings himself to a stop in front of them, squatting down to meet them on the ground. I'll stay here and see if I can't find some of those packets of jerky from the wagon. Sound good? Izuku nods his head rapidly and yells a brief, okay, before he scurries off. Yuuga is less enthusiastic due to tiredness, but also nods and gets up to do whatever he needs to. Hisashi, of course, wastes no time to get started on his mission. He notices the tent has been covered in mud and random leaves when he gets close enough to notice, giggling quietly when he realizes it was probably from the kids trying to camouflage them better. It's a cute attempt, honestly. He roots around aimlessly through their supplies until he finds what he's searching for. He also grabs a couple water bottles and some dried veggie chips he stored away in there a few days ago while the kids weren't looking. He sets them down by the pit and exits the camp to look for a spare log or something for them to sit on. He doesn't find much besides a few that are already soft and malleable. Hopefully these are just dead and the trees on this planet aren't always this weak. It would suck if they had to live in the tent forever. Maybe he can try and make bricks. Cobb? He's pretty sure living in a cave would be a better alternative than whatever they'd end up with if he tried honestly. He's just going to hope the whole soft wood thing isn't true and move on. He decides to drag in a couple big rocks instead, and puts a folded up towel on each of them for cushioning. It's not long after that Yuuga comes back in, followed shortly by Izuku. Hisashi passes out the snacks, enjoying the looks on their faces when they catch sight of the treat. Hope you two enjoy your breakfasts. We're gonna have to keep eating this stuff till we're able to catch something else. Yuuga groans and Izuku laughs at him shamelessly, patting him on the back. He then looks at Hisashi with a sheepish grin. Honestly, I've been a bit too caught up in worrying about those alien guys we hit earlier to actually take it all in, he says, sounding a bit troubled. That makes Hisashi blink for a moment before he can form a response. Well, I'm sure they'll be fine, so I don't think we'll have to be worrying about them. Their technology is beyond ours when it comes down to it, so they probably have some sort of tool to fix that hole we made before anything bad happens, if that's what you're worried about. He takes a bit of his jerky as Izuku nods, and he continues. Besides, if they did have any major troubles, we'd more than likely be the first to know since this is the closest escape planet from the ship. Izuku gulps, and Yuuga picks their head up from where they were slouching on the sidelines with a frown. Well, if they do, then they better not try anything, or they'll regret it. I worked way too hard on this fire pit to just desert it. Yuuga, I don't think we'll have the time to worry about the fire pit if we were getting shot at by aliens, Izuku replies, giving Yuuga the side eye. Hisashi flicks both of them. We are not fighting the aliens. That's final. I'm not having the HPSC come and shank us if we beat up someone important without realizing. They grumble, but don't say anything else, and the time continues to pass in silence, until the sun rises above their heads, and it's time to get back to work. When Aizawa is awoken by red lights beaming throughout the pirate ship he and his students were held in, he had to force himself not to get too hopeful or excited. As much as he wishes he could be rid of the filthy conditions they've been forced upon for the past 2 weeks, there's still a chance that it's just a drill for the members of the crew to stay vigilant, as is customary for pirated ships like this, if his research is to be at all trusted. He does his best to hush the loud whispers of his students in case the guards come by and see them talking. At some point he even has to grab hold of his son, just to keep him from getting too close to the bars trying to take a peek. He bats a hand at the kid in disapproval. This is what he gets for allowing himself to be coerced into teaching a bunch of adolescents. The red lights are still shining in the hallways, and it's soon accompanied by the screeching of the emergency alarms that make the majority of his class, and his kids cover their ears in pain from the loud noise. Meaning that, 1, this definitely isn't a drill, and 2, something has breached through the side of one of the hulls, and their oxygen levels could be entirely depleted any moment now. Aizawa jumps up with a curse, and the other 4 in the cell with him are on their feet in seconds. If he weren't too busy listening to the sound of someone sprinting down the direction of the hallway they were in, he would probably be proud of their sudden diligence. He steps in front of his kids and students, preparing himself to fight in case they've finally decided to be rid of them now that the panic level's up, but is soon trying not to let his shock show on his annoyingly expressive face when he spots the familiar face that pops up instead, one of his fellow pro hero, Hawks. The bird's claws make an awful grating sound on the floor that makes his eyes shift into a glare as he slides to a stop in front of the cell bars. He pulls a long feather from his pocket and begins picking the lock with the skill of someone who, honestly, should be much better at the task than he actually is, considering how long he's been in the job. Don't worry, the feathered hero says without looking at them, all his focus directly on the task in front of him. I'm still on your side. Was on a mission to take these guys down from the inside by getting myself captured, and I only just heard about you guys also being here when they were running past my door just now. The lock clicks open, and he opens the bar door for them, Honestly, it's a good thing I memorized a map of the place earlier, or I probably would have been too late. He grunts in reply and follows his students out of the cell, picking up 𝐬𝐬 and placing her gently onto his back, where she diligently clings. Thank you for the assist, Hawks. The bird chirps at him as they begin jogging down the opposite end of the hall. No prop, eraser, just doing what us heroes do after all. He points one of his red wings down the hall they were in. I already know the way to the emergency escape pods, so we should be set from here. No need for worrying whatsoever. Clear skies even. Aizawa just nods, and the 6 of them soon find themselves in a large room, with just 2 other doors on opposite sides of each other. 3 guards are yelling at each other to let themselves go first, shoving each other out of the way. TCHM, they're acting like they're a bunch of overgrown children. Some pirates they are. He shoots his scarf out at them, eyes glowing red, and the 3 of them go out without so much as a fight. Hawks then making quick work of knocking them out. The 2 heroes and 4 children then huddle themselves inside the escape. Aizawa lets Hawks take control of piloting duty, and instead makes quick work of buckling down the children for the ride. Typically everyone would be knocked temporarily unconscious, and they would just warp away, but, unfortunately, escape pods don't tend to have a warp function. The speed doesn't get nearly as fast, and it will take them about twice as long to get to the nearest planet, with a stable atmosphere and gravity. Unfortunately, with how far out they are, it's not likely the planet will be occupied since they're outside of the HPSC's designated territory. It's doubtful they'll be able to sustain themselves on rations for long, and twice as unlikely to be picked up by a rescue crew, depending on how much the government wants their precious Hawks back. A light mist enters the cabin as the ship prepares to take off, and Aizawa quickly buckles himself into the seat between his adopted son and daughter. It's not the same gas used to put people to sleep, but it does have a similar purpose, slowing the body's systems enough that they're less affected by the speed they're going at, and in case they're stuck traveling for a while so they don't starve. He feels the effects of the gas taking effect on him as the ship begins to rumble, and he lets his eyes fall close. Hopefully the planet they end up on is safe enough for them to live until a rescue team arrives. Noon arrives and Hisashi's quick to get back to work. He plans to go on a little hike around the surrounding nature of the base to get a look at the local environment to try and get a feel on what the climate and wildlife is usually like. Or something like that anyway. Honestly, he's just trying to keep himself busy in a way that makes him feel useful since his head's too messed up to do any of the heavy lifting. Maybe if he's lucky he'll find something useful on his journey. In the meantime, he leads the kiddos down to the creek to get a kickstarter on the fishing situation. He teaches them how to make a fish trap for the tiny fish that'll be useful later to catch the big fish, hopefully living in the creek. If not the creek, then whatever body of water the creek flows into. They take to it like a fish to water, pun intended, and Hisashi's left to start his midday hike after only 10 minutes of showing them how the trap works. It took them less than a minute to learn how to copy it. Sometimes Hisashi's a little frustrated at how smart his kids are. How's he supposed to bond with them if it takes them 2 seconds to pick up what he's laying down? He can't really complain though. Time is of the essence when trying to survive in the wild. Hisashi sheds all his warmer clothes, leaving him wearing a pair of tan cargo shorts, a sun hat, and a green tank top. He leaves on his steel-toed boots and empties his travel bag out of everything but hiking equipment, making sure to leave some room in case he finds anything. He decides to start by following the bend of the creek for the time being, dropping small, brightly colored aquarium rocks every now and then despite the unlikelihood of him actually getting lost. Better safe than sorry. They become more useful when he spots a hill in the distance and decides to abandon the creek side to go explore it. He was getting tired of fighting the tall grass and weeds anyway. The DIY spear he made from a long, sturdier sticks with one of his pocket knives tied at the end, not helping him to get through them in the slightest. All those jungle adventure movies with their vine-slicing swords lied. Unless you specifically need a sword to be able to cut the plants down. If so, then Hisashi's going to need to learn how to make a sword cause these weeds are ridiculous. He drops stones more steadily now that he's no longer following the trail of the water, since he's not exactly keen on getting lost so far away from camp. What he assumes are this planet's version of birds sing from above him, and he passes the time trying to mimic their calls. A fun hobby he had frequently liked doing when he was out in nature back on Earth. There's always so many interesting sounds to copy. The fun's only strengthened if they call back to him, as if he was another member of their species, and not just a very talented human. He's earned himself a lot of praise for his skills, even though they come naturally to him. Not to mention he's a good bit louder than most people as well. His parents used to joke when he was younger that he was destined to become a singer or something similar. Maybe a voice actor. Of course, he didn't end up going down that road for the most part. Unless you counted his almost famous podcast, Put Your Hands Up. His parents don't, and constantly ask him why he chose to become a teacher instead of a famous pop star or actor. Honestly, he sort of wishes they would just give up on the idea altogether. Then again, he supposes they'll have to now that he's gone. The thought of how they'll react to the news makes his breath halt for a moment, and tears begin to pool in the corners of his eyes, which he quickly blinks away in favor of realigning his focus back on his surroundings. Orangish red fruit hangs abundantly in the trees lining the side of the hill, and he can see small, fuzzy bugs flying around occasional bundles of small yellow flowers that are still growing on some of the less developed-looking trees. He decides to collect a few to take a few back with him to test later and moves to climb the one closest to him. The tree keeps a solid base for about a meter before branching out upward from several points. The end result makes the trees take on a sort of triangle-like shape, or one of those odd-looking mushrooms with the flat tops that you see in fantasy novels and movies. Also, as if to purposely further the resemblance, the skin of the tree is a starch white color, and doesn't seem to have any bark either. 𝐻𝐻𝐸 wonders what that means in way of bugs or other burrowing creatures. He doesn't see any holes. Do those kinds of bugs just not exist here? God, he hopes so. Either way, it doesn't take long to climb, even with his mild dizziness and worsening fatigue, and he's soon climbing back down with 3 bright fruits in his arms that he quickly transfers to his bag once he's able. The dark brown stems connecting the fruit to the white branches were still holding the fruits easily despite their size, so they definitely weren't close to rotting or anything. Hopefully they weren't too unripe to eat if they do end up being edible later. He continues his path up the hill, humming an energetic tune as he uses his spear as a walking stick to help counter his lack of balance. He makes no new discoveries on the way up, aside from a weird tree with really big, spiky, seed pod-looking things hanging close against the thick trunk. He ignores those though, since they don't look necessarily edible in any particular fashion. Then again, neither do a lot of things back on Earth. Eventually, he reaches the top and sits himself down on a mostly flat rock, looking down at the trees below, then up at the sky. The sun's barely moved since he left, despite him being gone for at least an hour now. He pays this no mind though. Instead, he focuses on the beauty of the clouds and sky on this foreign planet. It's remarkable how similar it looks to Earth's. After a couple minutes, he notices a strange speck breaking through the clouds, and the more he looks, the more he realizes something's wrong. The spot in the sky is almost glowing, and it becomes clear very quickly that it isn't some strange natural phenomenon. He watches it with bated breaths as it gets closer and closer downward, glowing bright enough to strain his eyes the longer he keeps looking. An escape pod of an older model, he realizes, one that hasn't been manufactured since before his own grandparents were even born, if he's remembering the weird shape of the thing correctly. Smoke rushes out of one of the front engines, and it shudders dangerously before crashing down not too far off from where he and his kids had landed themselves, though thankfully far enough off that it shouldn't pose an issue later down the line. Thick black smoke rises up from the crash site like a beacon. 𝐻𝐻𝐸 wobbles as he forces himself to stand and hurries to follow his little rock trail back down to the creek. He'll need to regroup before he goes to investigate that. He's in no condition to deal with more than likely injured and/or angry space travelers, especially since these guys are most likely from the foreign ship they had hit a few days earlier. He tightens his grip on his spear and hobbles a little faster than before. He hopes they won't be too mad when they realize, if they even lived through that crash, that is. A blue light fills the pod as the sleeping gas quickly begins to wear off of the 6 passengers. Aizawa is the first awakened due to his internal system's familiarity to the gas from previous missions and travels, and he's quick to stumble his way over the controls. The blue light signals their approach down into the planet's atmosphere, and since a quick glance at the screen shows that the autopilot setting seems to be completely fucking broken, thank you Hawks for being so goddamn useless when their literal lives are on the line. He'll have to control their descent manually so as to not crash them all into the ground in a fiery ball of death. He takes the controls with a practiced ease, noting with more than a hint of frustration that the topography search and landing features are also offline, which means that now they'll be struggling not only to land, but also to even find a place for said landing. He hears Hawks walk up beside him at some point to help, but ignores him. He's the one who got them into this mess to begin with if his guesses are correct. And if he's reading the screen map correctly, he's now also gotten them trapped a fucking death world. Aizawa was beginning to wonder how this bird even passed the hero exams. He definitely wouldn't have if he had been placed in one of Aizawa's classes. They soon breach the threatening-looking gaseous clouds of the death planet, and their certain doom is further guaranteed by the front engines dying. Some otherworldly being definitely has it out for him today. An emergency maneuver has to be committed to keep them from crashing into a mountain face with the front engine being cut off, and he barely manages to divert their path back down more into the trees that will hopefully cushion their fall some. They barely have the time to properly slow their descent for landing and buckle themselves back in before they're hitting the ground. A rightfully terrifying landing. His chest belt almost strangles him as the fabric catches his neck, the momentum throwing them all down and forward simultaneously. Smoke begins to fill the small space and dust and debris rains down from the ceiling where the metal has cracked and broken inward on itself. He clumsily unbuckles himself before falling down onto the metal flooring. He realizes they landed at a bit harder of an angle than he first thought. He manages to push himself up from the ground with much more struggle than expected. The gravity of this planet definitely being at least a bit stronger than any planet he's been on in the past. And turns back to his class and Hawks. Hawks looks a lot more shaken up than he is. One of his legs has an unhealthy bend to them, probably from hitting the ground too hard when the pod bounced. Somehow, all of the kids except for 𝐀𝐦, who just blearily blinks at the ground with wide eyes and a blank expression, seem to have slept through the whole ordeal. Maybe it's a good thing they have a low tolerance for the gas then. The less traumatized they are the better, no matter what the HPSC thinks. He moves to 𝐀𝐦 first since Hawks can handle himself and places a hand on her shoulder, shaking it a bit until she looks at him. Eyes still looking shaken, but at least a bit more aware than before. She'll be okay, he thinks. He clears his throat, wincing at the dryness of it. Come on, we have to get outside now. Do you think you can stand on your own? She blinks before nodding slowly and moving to unbuckle herself. Aizawa sighs in relief. She's at least mostly okay then. He helps her stand and manages to shove the door to the pod open and sits her down outside with Hawks, who has managed to follow behind him on his own, somehow despite his definitely broken leg. When that's sorted, he heads back in for the others. Mina and Hitoshi are already stirring, so he goes over to 𝐸𝐸 first, securing her onto his back again, but using his scarf to hold her this time since she's not conscious yet. Thankfully, the other two have already gained most of their awareness back by the time he's done, and he doesn't have to do much for them, but give some mildly reassuring words and take them out to sit with 𝐀𝐦 and Hawks. They immediately start whispering with the amphibious girl, but he pays it no mind and goes back into the pod for the small amount of survival supplies that came with the ship. He finds a dark clothed fabric that he recognizes as that of a hooded shawl, maneuvering to put it on without waking 𝐸𝐸. He could use some animosity to help cope with the stress of everything. He could even pretend that he's a deathworlder and belongs here like everything else. He throws the strap of the bag over the shoulder, not containing 𝐸𝐸's head, and hurries back outside. It's a good thing they've already gone over crash procedures in his class already, because he doesn't even have to say anything, and all three of his students are up and ready to follow him. He gives Hawks a hand up and lets the bird use his arm like a crutch, since he's the most physically strong out of everyone here. Plus, he doesn't truly hate the bird, especially not enough to let him suffer on a broken leg when he knows how much those hurt. He'd be a cruel man to do anything but help when he's the most capable to do so. He decides to follow the direction that their ship had been heading in before they hit the ground, since he is pretty certain that he could remember seeing a rather large field in that direction before his view was fully obscured by the smoke from the front engine. If they wanted to have even a chance to be rescued, they'd have to be somewhere that could be easily seen from above, so the scouts could find them, at least until they could make some sort of construct to show they were there. He hears a loud noise from off in the distance, and is quickly reminded that they were currently on a death world, where even the plants and the ground itself wanted them dead. Maybe being somewhere easily seen wasn't the best idea. Then again, they would also need the best view of their surroundings as possible if they wanted to be able to fight off anything that he knows will surely come to attack them the longer they're forced to stay here. A loud warble that sounds scarily like a greeting in common is called out, similar to the first noise, but this time much closer, and he almost shudders with fear. This is like something out of the horror films from that one planet in the Hasu region. He quickly urges them all to move faster. Everyone but his kit, who looks about as terrified by the noise, as he feels, gives him a confused look, but obliges anyway, trusting his leadership skills. He seriously hopes that thing doesn't catch up to them. Within the time it took for Hisashi to scramble his way back down to the campsite, Izuku and Yuuga had seemingly all but vacated the little fishing trap spot and had migrated back into the fenced area to root through the wagon for reasons that Hisashi couldn't explain. He could vaguely hear Izuku shouting about something or other towards Yuuga, who was half sticking out of the tent, as they rummaged around through their stuff, looking for something he assumes must be pretty important considering the yells back from the blonde child that rarely ever raises their voice in most scenarios, even those that require it. His curiosity causes him to hasten his speed as he jogs over to the open gate door of the fencing, briefly stopping to grab onto the railing as he catches his breath. He continues forward at a more subdued pace, stopping just behind an entirely unaware Izuku, still digging through their supplies like he's trying to find something to wear out to an important outing. Hisashi yelps rather loudly as a paper towel roll is tossed at him, smacking him in the face as he stumbles to catch it and causing Izuku and Yuuga to both whip around in shock as they finally take in his presence. "Dad," Izuku basically screeched, dropping the camo print bag he had previously been holding, an exaggeratedly large smile of his face that almost resembled the one he copied of that All Might guy. A famous hero if the news articles about him are to be believed, though Hisashi didn't buy it. No one's that perfect of a human being. Yuuga stepped out of the tent to stand by Izuku, looking much less suspicious than their brother, funnily enough. Despite the kid's flair for dramatics, they've always been the less likely one to overreact. Unlike the green one, Izuku sort of lowered himself into a weird box-like stance and waved, side-eyeing his sibling at their nonchalance. "Welcome back. How was the walk?" Yuuga smiled and tilted their head as they added to the supposedly casual conversation. "Oh, did you find any gifts for us?" With how many shiny crystals I and Izuku were able to spot in the water already, there must have been something interesting found on your journey. "Yes." Hisashi considers the words he will never understand where the blonde child had acquired such a fancy way of talking. No one he knows talks like that, though. On another note, now that he thinks of it, really is less of the words they say, but how they say it. Maybe, damn it. Focus Hisashi and decides to play along for just a moment while he packs his bag in preparation for the new search and rescue mission. "Well, little listener, I don't have any gifts," he begins, sidestepping Izuku to gain access to the wagon and shoulders his bag off. He takes the fruits out as he continues. "However, I did find these weird mango-looking fruits that might be edible. Don't touch them till I say it's safe, though. You dig?" Yuuga and Izuku both nod, green hair just about flying off the shorter kid's head in relief that they aren't being interrogated. Yuuga just looks vaguely puzzled at the man's actions, probably already catching on to his motives, if the slight squint they give is any indication. Hisashi shoves the more unnecessary things from the bag into the corner closest to the tent walls and starts shoveling through the already messy supplies for the medkit he had discarded into the pile earlier that morning before he had left. When he finds it, he takes the time to move some of the other stuff out of the way so it could be pressed against the side of the bag. He picks up a retractable shovel that he honestly doesn't even remember packing before noticing Izuku and even Yuuga beginning to squirm in place from where they stand and realizes he had forgotten to clear the air. He gives them a cheeky smile and waves them off in a shoe motion as he speaks. "You two can keep getting ready now. I know what you two were doing, so it's fine. Time is of the essence." He grins as they rush back off to what they were previously doing, this time with a more excited vibe than they had previously. He picks up a spare water bottle and tosses it in the bag, shoving it back onto his shoulders once it's fully zipped and secure. He heads over to the rocks by the fire pit to watch as the other two as they rush around with their own bags. Izuku was the first done, though Yuuga was essentially right after him anyway. His knees and hips pop as he lifts himself off the rock, cursing them all the while, and he leads the three off into the woods, giving them a quick rundown of the plan as they head in the direction of the smoke that could just barely be seen from beneath the trees. The first plan of action is just to make it to the fallen space vessel. First aid and/or other actions will depend on what they find after they get there. They also need to make sure there's not an active fire going, and put it out if there is, which leads him to praise Izuku for the decision to take a bucket with him. Though he's not sure where he had been keeping that thing without him noticing. Probably his clothes bag. The tricky bit of the plan will depend on whether or not the crashed aliens have already vacated by the time they get there. On one hand, them not being there means they're healthy enough to move around, and therefore probably aren't dying, which is good. On the other hand, if they aren't there, it'll be much more difficult to locate them, especially since the sun is almost setting into the evening now. he decides the best bet is to start trying to call for them now before they get to the ship, in case the others are in hearing range, and might stay put if they hear that there's other sapiens nearby. If they don't think they're hostile, that is. He turns to the kiddos still walking beside him and waves for their attention before clearing his throat. Okay, he starts. So it's probably a good idea to start calling out to them, since we've probably at least made it into hearing range by now. You two remember the word for hello in common that I taught you before we originally set off? Izuku nods, looking more than a little smug, and Yuuga makes a face for a brief moment before nodding as well, taking a moment to clarify. It's hello. Yes, Hisashi nods. That's right, little listener, gold star for making sure. No point in yelling out the wrong thing because you couldn't quite remember. You two can start yelling that out, though I'll probably add a bit more than that personally. Don't feel too discouraged. They both nod, even though he was technically only talking to Yuuga. Hisashi calls out first so the kids wouldn't have to get anxious about it, yelling the greeting out loudly enough that the two next to him wince slightly, shifting away a bit before starting up their own calls. He notices Yuuga is a bit more hesitant with it than Izuku, since they most likely haven't been practicing as much, and makes a mental note to give them some extra lessons later, which they are definitely going to need if the three of them actually manage to find the aliens quick enough. They continue calling out all the way to the ruined escape pod, which has crushed quite a few of those weaker meated trees Hisashi had noted earlier, creating a large crater from the impact. Thankfully, it's less banged up than he had originally imaged with all the smoke they had seen. Nothing's on fire, and the smoke production seems to be steadily decreasing. He has Izuku and Yuuga stand a bit of a ways off from the wreckage as he does a quick inspection of the outside, and then, more hesitantly, shifting the door to look inside as well. The interior appears to be empty for the most part, though he does note that there has been quite a bit of damage done that wasn't noticeable from the outside. He spots a bit of red near the seats and goes to investigate further, gaining confirmation that the spot indeed appears to be some sort of sentient's blood, more pinking than would be normal for a human. The location tells him that it was probably someone's leg that took the damage. He mentally that there's at least one already injured. Upon further inspection, he notes nothing else of importance, other than a very well-woven looking jewelry. A mixture of a sort of fabric lace and shiny gold-lined rocks, and what looks like feathers and a few pieces of bone arranged into a possible necklace-like shape. It's the coolest looking accessory Hisashi's ever seen, and he's very careful when putting it into his bag. He leaves with nothing else of note and heads back over to where he left the kids. Izuku's already climbed halfway up a tree with the time it took him to look around the inside. He explains his findings, the two looking pretty worried at the mention that one of the survivors had been injured, though Yuuga's attention is soon overtaken by the strange neckpiece that Hisashi refuses to let either of them touch. They've broken less fragile things, even when genuinely trying to be careful before, and something about this particular item seems to carry some kind of importance in it. Instead, he mentions that they should probably start searching for where the lost sapiens had gone. Dropping down from the tree before anyone else can hand out ideas, Izuku excitedly digs through his bag and pulls out a couple of what look like gym whistles, holding them above his head by the strings. "We can use these," he exclaims rapidly. "We'll cover a lot more ground if we split up, right? So when we want to notify the others in case we find anything important, we can just blow on these. They're really super loud. I tested them. So don't worry about not being able to hear them if we wander too far. And they come with a string to go around your neck, so we won't lose them." Hisashi looks nervously at the whistles, lightly clenching his hand momentarily as he speaks. "Well, I'm glad you came prepared, lil listener. I'm not too sure how I feel about leaving either of you by yourselves in the wilderness of an unknown planet, especially one considered to be a death world by galactic standards." Izuku's excitement drops a bit and lowers his arm back down, looking at the apparently very loud gym whistles, making Hisashi feel supremely guilty for crushing the kid's jam, even if he still stands by his words. Yuuga speaks up next, clearly taking pity on their brother. "Well, perhaps it would be less dangerous if at least me and Izuku went together then. Even just two separate directions are better than one." Izuku shoots his head up to look hopefully up at Hisashi, who cringes before weighing his options. He really doesn't want to leave them alone at all where he's unfamiliar, this being much different than just leaving them by the camp while he surveys the area. But he also doesn't want to crush Izuku's hope, and it's not like he's seen any major threats so far. He sighs, slowly shaking his head a bit as he speaks up. "Fine. But you two better stick by each other thoroughly, and stay headed in a straight line, no getting lost." "Yes," Izuku jumps up and hands Hisashi and Yuuga a whistle, grinning wildly. "We promise. And we'll make sure to whistle a bunch in case we find anything. Even if it's just some miscellaneous object. You'll be the first to know." Yuuga pipes up too. "We should set up a specific number of whistles for different levels of importance. Like 1 for a clue, 2 if we find something really important, 3 if we need help, and 4 if we find the survivors." Izuku nods in agreement, and they both look to Hisashi for confirmation. He sighs again, but nods, the 2 kids excitedly running off from the right side of the ship and beyond, screaming hellos before he could even think to change his mind. Hisashi stares after them, brimming with nerves, but eventually starts heading forward, towards the field where the 3 of them had originally landed, calling out a lot less expressively than he had done before. These aliens better be damn glad when he eventually finds them, after several minutes of walking and occasionally pausing for the members of the group, other than 𝐲𝐸, to regain their stamina. The 6 of them finally break free of the tall trees and into a large field, covered in rocks and vegetation. 𝐲𝐸 leads them to a patch of fine, dry dirt, with no obvious rocks as far as 𝐲𝐸 can see. He allows the 5 of them to fall bonelessly to the ground as he dutifully begins setting up the standard foldable survival tent that had been stored in the escape pod, made from a thick cloth of a light reddish-brown color, matching the dirt underfoot easily, probably even more so to those of the group lacking the color receptors for the color red. He works tirelessly, even as the fatigue starts to weigh him down, only stopping to hand Eri off to Hitoshi to watch over, so he could move around better without having to worry about jostling the small child. He finishes the task fairly quickly due to his repeated practice in the far past of his own hero schooling, thankfully still ingrained with him. His students are up and moving again around by the time he's begun putting the little amount of supplies they have inside the shelter, doing basic stretches to regain some of their lost energy and body function. He soon spots his pink student doing basic first aid for 𝐸𝐻's messed up leg. Pride flows through him for his student, though the help is not nearly enough as much as the avian man will need if he wants to keep full function of the limb later down the line. It's good enough for now. He'll simply have to check it over himself later. He wanders off towards a rather large pile of rocks and carries as many of the small ones as he can back over to the patch of dirt that is their temporary camp, dropping them mindlessly onto the ground before going back for more. The rocks are needed to create a safe base for him to set up a smoke signal, as is customary for these types of situations, even if the likelihood of anyone seeing the signal and rescuing them is incredibly low in their current circumstances. The simple action helps to temporarily soothe his nerves for the time being, a distraction from the constant feeling of being watched that comes with being in a large exposed area. He's had an issue with large open spaces like this for as long as he could remember. The uneasiness persisted, no matter how many times his adopted parents or teachers tried to explain to him that it was much safer than being in a space where you can't see what is around you. On this death world of a planet, the feeling is even stronger than usual, crawling up his spine and making him want to curl up into a ball in a hole and hide. Thankfully, his own adopted children don't seem to have taken the fear as their own, other than a slight unease in Hitoshi on occasion, probably influenced by 𝐲𝐸's own, though he gets over it much quicker than 𝐲𝐸 ever has. As he begins setting up the rock circle, he notices that most of the group seems to be getting a bit sluggish, probably from the planet's abnormally hot midday sun, which his hooded poncho outfit is currently protecting him from evidently. He pauses his task to encourage the ones most affected to take shelter inside, especially Mina, whose thick wool makes her more prone to overheating than the rest of the group. Hitoshi alone, not counting Eri, convinces him to let the kid stay outside with him, and 𝐲𝐸's pretty sure he only managed it because having the kid out here with him eases his nerves more than he'd quite like to admit even to just himself. He puts on a dark face mask and makes quick work of setting up the smoke signal after the rocks are finally all moved into their correct positions. The dark coals covered in an even dark powder immediately sending up thick plumes of smoke that makes his eyes sting upon ignition. His nose would probably burn too had he not put the soft fabric mask on. He's actually sort of thankful for his impulsive decisions now. More than anything, he's glad he built the thing more than a few meters from the fabric shelter. No one wants to deal with putrid-smelling smoke gunk infecting their sinuses while they're trying to sleep. Not that any of them will be having an easy time of that either way. He pulls himself off the ground and stretches his back out, providing a loud pop that makes his son cringe at him like always. Pink nose scrunched cutely, he just smirks at the kit from beneath his mask, which he has decided to keep on for the time being, and drops down to sit next to him. As he sits, he hears the echo of warbling voices out from the forest once again, the wrongness of the noise making him shudder. And he shifts closer to his kit, whose fur is also standing on end. He contemplates sending the kit off into the tent in order to calm the more anxious part of his mind, saying that his kit could be in danger. But 𝐀𝐦 doesn't want to drag the kit around over his own feeble anxiety, no matter what the sinking feeling in his gut says. The warble sounds out ominously closer than before, from the edge of the forest, and as he squints to see better of what the actual fuck is making that noise, he finally spots it. A bipedal creature covered in thick feathers, sporting several different shades of red and white, with a long tail that ends in a fan, and an elongated reptilian muzzle filled with sharp teeth. Short, feathered but useless wings ended with sharp claws and scaly legs with even sharper talons than the claws dig into the dirt as the creature trots into the clearing. His breath catches, panic rising, and he quickly pulls his kits up with as calm movements as possible and shoves them towards the tent with mumbled orders to stay hidden as he pulls the small knife from the supply bag out of his front pant pocket where he'd stuck it earlier and flicks the blade open with a soft swish. He could practically hear Hitoshi shaking off to the side of him as he carried the sleeping 𝐴𝐻𝐸 with him into the tent, needing no further prompting to not get involved. The kid had next to no fighting skills in comparison to his classmates due to his late entry, and they both knew it. He could hear his heartbeat pounding through his skull as the creature let out another warble, sounding almost like the common word for hello, elongated and stretched out from a voice that wasn't its own. The fact that this creature had heard common speech before was even more horrifying than the mimicry itself. He could only guess what happened to the owner of the last voice. 𝐀𝐦 chooses to slowly shift away from the tent in hopes to keep the beast from attacking it directly. The feathered beast stalked forward with bouncy steps, tilting its head in one direction and back, making sharp clicking noises in quick recession before letting out another howled call. As it came closer to him, he realized the beast reached about midway up his chest at its most constant head height. Not a good thing at all considering the fact that its teeth looked to be at least 2 inches long each, and that's not even considering the claws on its feet and drooping arm wings. It comes to a slow stop about 1/2 of the standard average measurement of a sapient's body length of him, sniffing the air and shaking its head aggressively. He readies his knife, bracing himself and throwing himself to the side as it suddenly jumps forward by half the distance, body tilted down and maw wide open beyond what he had ever known was even possible for a living being, exposing several rows of teeth. By the grace of whatever higher power may be watching over him, he will not let this beast turn his children into orphans. Izuku and Yuuga don't take their job of being careful very seriously, though they aren't entirely careless either. Izuku spends the time whacking the dirt with a long stick he found while looking for tracks, while Yuuga calls out for the both of them. Izuku's pretty sure only half of what his sibling was calling out was actually common, or English for that matter. Maybe French. Izuku doesn't speak French, and he's not sure how Yuuga supposedly learned, so he has no way of actually knowing. A few times he'll think he's finally found the alien's tracks, and calls out excitedly for Yuuga, but the blonde keeps killing his hope with their unfortunately very realistic logic. Those are far too small, they say. And there is only one pair. Dad said he found evidence of at least 3. You'd know this if you hadn't been pretending to be Spider-Man the whole time he was talking to us. PSSHH. They talk as if they hadn't been pretending. They were a crystal gem from Steven Universe, looking for corruption monsters when they had first gotten here. That's right, Blondie. Izuku knows what you do in your free time. Don't even try to hide it. Eventually, after about 5 minutes of walking, not that Izuku has an actual way to tell, he doesn't own a watch, they stumble upon a den of sorts. A big hole in the ground right at the bottom of a big peach-colored tree, between the roots that stick out slightly before disappearing beneath the soil, as all tree roots on this planet seem to do. The opening of the burrow is surrounded by broken chips of shredded wood and dead plant material, and mostly closed up with dirt. The bottom where the fibers start to mix with the ground is covered in deep scratches, made by something with either really big claws or really tiny handspaws. The closer the two of them get, the more the air begins to take on the scent of mildly burnt buttered popcorn, which makes Izuku a weird mixture of hungry for popcorn and grossed out knowing that the smell is probably whatever creatures that lived in the burrow's urine, and they're walking all over it. They sort of just stand there and stare at the hole once they get to the front of it, not really knowing what to do with it, but also not really wanting to just walk off without discovering anything of importance. Izuku's almost on the verge of just smacking the dumb thing with his stick and calling it a day when Yuuga waves his hand in his face for his attention. What? Stop smacking me already. What is it? Yells Izuku, smacking the blonde's hands away before they start trying to grab at his shoulders to shake him. Open your ears if you don't want me smacking you. I said your name like 8 times, they say with squinted eyes. I'm gonna start telling Dad your hearing is getting worse if this keeps up. Also, I want your stick. What? No, get your own, he shouts, smacking the other with the mentioned item as they tried to grab it from him. He eventually prevails and backs away from the other quickly, narrowly avoiding tripping backwards over a protruding root. Also, if you tell Dad, then I'm telling him your vision's worse. I'm not the only one with his terrible genes, you know. Yuuga gasps. You wouldn't. You know I hate the eye puffy machines. I would too, he says smugly, leaning on his stick in faux relaxation. Plus, he'll probably make me go too, and I actually like the eye doctor, so that's just another pro as far as I'm concerned. Fine. You're safe for now then, I suppose, they say, still smiling. I really would like to see the stick though. Izuku stands back up straight and walks back over to the burrow where he was previously standing, still keeping a firm grip on his stick. Why? What are you even planning on doing with it? I want to poke the hole with it. They hold out their index finger to shush him when he opens his mouth to reply that he could easily do that himself, thank you. Gently, something you're super bad at being. Plus, I have longer arms than you, so I wouldn't have to be as close in case something pops out and tries to attack us. Izuku glares, but slumps his shoulders in surrender. Fine. I'm not saving you if you get attacked by a rabid space raccoon though. That's fine by me, they say, taking the stick from him. They slowly inch forward towards the hole, holding up the stick in front of them. Izuku backs up, just in case, standing behind a tree. Yuuga lifts the stick and lightly taps the dirt, keeping the opening closed, and when nothing happens they gently tap it again a few times until the dirt suddenly falls apart inward, exposing the inside and making it easy for Yuuga at least to hear the chittering coming from inside. Their eyes widened in realization, backing up swiftly as a much louder screech sounds from deeper in, loud enough that even Izuku could hear it from behind the tree. A large, chestnut-colored creature zips out of the hole, looking similar to a very large weasel or a huge ferret. Dense fur raises on end as it spots Yuuga, letting out another screech as it darts forward to charge as its transgressor. Yuuga yells and drops the stick, darting out of its path, yelling louder as it immediately skirts around to follow. Izuku runs out from behind his tree, picking the stick up off the ground and chasing after, blowing the emergency whistle to signal their dad, entirely forgetting how many times the signal was, making him sound like a very strange angry bird as he blows into it frantically. His grip on it soon releases, as he grips the stick with both hands and smacks the gigantic weasel as hard as he can, breaking the stick over its tough back with a loud snap. This appears to only anger the weasel, and it screeches aggressively, pivoting around to run at him instead. Yuuga kicks the weasel before it's able to bite Izuku, flinging it away long enough for them to both sprint away as it regains its stance and angrily charges. Its mouth opens almost horrifically wide, exposing all of its yellowed teeth, as it lets out the loudest screech yet, and jumping up to bite them just as blur of yellow flies through the trees. A long stick with a shiny end flies out and flings the creature into a nearby tree, cutting the loud screech off instantly as it thuds onto the ground, writhing, a small patch of red forming beneath it from where it had been nicked by the stick's blade. Izuku and Yuuga look up at their savior with hitched breaths that they quickly let out in a relieved sigh at the image of their poor, anxious father. The taller blonde pants loudly, red in the face and shaking slightly from sprinting over half a mile, ducking around trees and jumping over the exposed roots with varying success by the look of his scraped up hands and the dirt on his knees and face. The bandages from his head wound completely gone, leaving a red and scabbed mark behind. He quickly moves over to them, slumping onto the two with open arms in what is almost a hug, but probably looks more like a sports huddle, still panting and exhausted. You *huff*2 *huff* are *huff* so dead, he grumbles, quietly wheezing into their hair. What? Says Izuku confusedly, unable to understand the mumbled words. He says we're dead, Yuuga pipes up helpfully. Gonna be more than dead if you two don't start explaining yourselves, says Hisashi, lifting himself off their shoulders to glare at them. What the hell were you two doing? I told you two to be careful. What is that? He points at the still writhing, bleeding, and now wheezing space weasel lying by the tree. The two kids look at each other, realizing one of them is going to have to explain their complete stupidity to their anxious wreck of a father. Yuuga immediately throws a finger up to tap their nose, yelling, "Not it." "Ugh, fine." He turns to look at their dad, who actually looks done with their shit for the first time in a long while. "Well, you see, there was just this really weird looking hole, alright? Welp, this is going terribly already. And we just wanted to see if there was anything cool in it. Like how there were cool rocks in the small caves by the creek. We didn't know it was occupied. Please don't be mad." Hizashi takes a deep breath in and holds it with shut eyes before releasing, looking more tired at that point than anything else. "I'm not mad, little listener. Honestly, this is all my fault. I never should have let you two go off on your own in the first place. I should have known something like this would happen. It's my fault for not thinking ahead." Izuku and Yuuga lower their heads in shame, losing the man's trust being a lot worse to bear than if he had simply been mad at them. The weasel shuddered a ragged breath, finally going limp and against the hard bark of the tree. The three humans turned their gaze to it sadly. It hadn't really done much but defend itself, and they killed it. Yuuga's eyes widened with the memory of their previous discovery. "Oh shit, I didn't think I had hit it that hard," mumbles Hizashi softly, raising a hand to his mouth. He never liked killing things if he could help it. "At least it won't be following us now, though. I've seen enough tracks to know that there's enough trouble in these woods already." "Wait," cries Yuuga as Hizashi shifts to walk away from the scene. "What about the babies?" "The babies?" Hizashi and Izuku both exclaimed, their father now actually looking sick and Izuku horrified. Oh, they guess Izuku hadn't been able to hear them. "Yeah, in the burrow. It's probably why it attacked us so angrily in the first place." Yuuga's lip trembled remorsefully. "Please don't tell me we're just leaving them there. It's not their fault I decided to fuck with some wild animal's home." "Language," Hizashi chided before looking down, cringing. "Though I guess you're right. It would be cruel to just leave them there all defenseless." Izuku gasps. "Does this mean we get space pets?" Hizashi's nose crinkled. "I never said that. What would we even feed them?" "Maybe we can mash up some veggies for them," supplied Yuuga. "They don't look like they're meat eaters, but I'm sure there's something out here they like." Hizashi sighed. "Oh, not you too, Yuuga. Ugh. Fine. We'll take them back with us. Just don't blame me if they starve." Izuku and Yuuga look excited at each other. Dad's never let them have a pet before. Even if he had said he'd get them a cat for their next birthday, there's no cats in space. Yuuga's excitement is a bit less strong than their brother's, still feeling guilty over the whole situation. The three walk up to the chirping den and look inside, Hizashi taking a mini flashlight out of his pocket after seeing how dark it is inside. Two tiny versions of the mega weasel lay curled in the very back of the tunnel, but still within an arm's reach. If he were to lay sideways, maybe. One munched on a fern-like plant, an assortment of different vegetation laying in the leftmost corner in a more dug-out space. "Huh, well that's convenient," says Hizashi as he reaches his arm through the hole to grab onto one of the young things, hissing at its little teeth as it tries to bite its way to freedom. His hand isn't bleeding or anything though, so he hands it off for Yuuga to hold on to. He reaches in again, handing the next one to Izuku. At last he goes back in one more time to scoop out the creature's food, pulling out a Ziploc bag from his pocket and shoving the contents of his hand into it. "Well, we better get a move on then," he says, wiping his beat-up hands on his trousers with a wince. "The sun's probably going to go down soon, and I don't want to go toe-to-toe with any of this planet's nocturnal creatures." "Wait!" cries Izuku in sudden alarm. What's with Hizashi's kids and giving him a heart attack? What? What is it? Hizashi says, looking around for a threat. "Look up at the sky. I see smoke over that way," shouts Izuku, pointing up through the foliage where Hizashi and Yuuga can both make out the vague outline of smoke trailing up from somewhere nearby. "Holy shit, sorry. I was just over in that direction like 2 seconds ago," Hizashi exclaims in surprise. "Did something catch on fire or—" "The aliens," Izuku and Yuuga both screech, perking up drastically, though for different reasons. Yuuga still looks worried. Izuku looks up at Hizashi, heroic genes spiraling. "We need to go find them. They could be trying to signal us. What if they're in danger and need help?" Okay. We'll check it out before we head back." Hizashi looks back at the smoke still visible through the branches. "Even if it's not them, we'd still need to check on it. Forest fires are no joke, yo." He starts walking, looking more and more anxious with the darkening of the sky, hand clutching his spear. "Let's hurry and get this done with. There's some tracks I saw earlier that I really don't want to fuck with the owner of. Their group of 3, technically 5, if you count the new Baby Weasel additions, quickly make their way in the direction of the smoke column, the walk eventually shifting into more of an awkward jog than anything else. Hisashi's anxiety only gets worse the closer they get to the source, and after the 5th time spotting the big on and off lizard-like prints from earlier, he's unable to make himself loosen his grip on his spear at all, too afraid he'll end up needing it. As if he'd even need a blade when he has his own weapon built in, he thinks to himself bitterly. Never could outrun his own past, no matter how much he ran and trained and tried to forget. It only takes the realization that they're essentially following the tracks to their destination for him to take out the extra throwing blade from his backside pocket, sliding the sheath off easily. Soon, they reach the entrance of the forest from where they first arrived, mostly unchanged besides the reptilian tracks sunk throughout the mud. They breach through the trees and into the light before stiffening in surprise as a loud howl reaches their ears. It's not the howl itself that's haunting, but the distinct familiarity of the sound. An almost uncanny copy of Hisashi's own voice, replaying his earlier calls through the forest, but wrong, distorted like something made using an AI. Hisashi, despite his previous hesitance, finds himself instantly running towards the sound, hands gripping his weapons with white knuckles. He can't stop himself from getting incredibly pissed off by the noise, red covering his vision, though he has no idea why that is. He's heard people try and mimic his voice with actual AI generators in the past, and it had never upset him in the slightest. Nor does he have any particular vendetta against the lizard creature itself. So what's with a sudden spike of enraged adrenaline coursing through him? Finally seeing the thing up close doesn't make him any less angry, especially upon noticing the humanoid being it's advancing towards. The presence of another sapient in front of him does have him lowering his weapon though. Never point a blade at something you're not willing to stab is what his father had always told him. Well, actually that lesson was about firearms, but Hisashi is pretty sure the sentiment still counts. Instead, he reels his arm back and throws the dagger with fine-tuned accuracy at the creature's feet, causing the creature to let out a startled shriek, no longer using the mangled mimicry of Hisashi's voice. It spreads its wings out as it twists to face where the sudden projectile had come from, knocking the limb into the other sapient and throwing them off their feet with a surprised yelp and a thud. The beast takes one look at him, still holding his spear and confidently maintaining eye contact, and, almost intelligently, seems to come to some sort of decision, lazily turning and disappearing into the forest without glancing back. Hisashi waits until he can no longer hear or see it before letting out a hefty sigh, walking over to where the bird Dino had stood and picking up the knife, placing it back in his bag. Izuku and Yuuga run up to him from behind, also staring at where the velociraptor-looking alien had gone, looking both concerned and a bit disturbed. They follow dutifully behind him as he makes his way to where the alien sapient had fallen. The humanoid being holds their hands on the sides of their head, staring at them as they approach, glowing red eyes shining from underneath the hooded garment that seemed to look like it was trying to float like the scarf around their neck was. Hisashi doesn't remember reading about a species with powers like this during his studies. But that's fine. He'll just ask later when he's confirmed that this person and their companions, yes, he knows they have others with them. He saw the weird tracks mixed in with the lizard ones are all okay and not at current risk of dying. The glowing stopped and their clothes floated back down onto their body, lifting a pressure from his throat that he hadn't realized was there until it suddenly disappeared. He carefully extended a hand to the other with a closed-mouth grin, being careful not to show his teeth, as he leaned down a bit to help them up. "Hey there, friend, need some there," he says in mostly fluent Common as they take his hand. "We were just coming by to check out what all that smoke was about, and after seeing your predicament, I figured I should help out. Ya dig?" They tilt their head, looking a bit overwhelmed as scooch away from him by a few feet, avoiding Hisashi's gaze awkwardly with their face tucked into their scarf. They speak curtly, voice muffled from beneath the black face mask that Hisashi had briefly thought was part of their skin from the odd texture of it. "Thank you for the help. My crew and I crashed not far off from here a few clicks ago." They didn't elaborate any further and Hisashi was about to start getting suspicious when a noise came from the weird deflated tent-like contraption a few yards away. A head and torso holding close resemblance to a big cat, but in purple peeks out from the tent flap, ears pushed back and holding a fluffy white thing with the hand, not gripping the flap. "Dad." Oh, so they're a parent then. No wonder they seemed so hesitant about their crew. Hisashi could understand that. He hasn't been super upfront about his own kids either. The sapient and supposedly male alien flicked their around to glare at the kid. With a growl. "I thought I told you to stay hidden." "Yeah, but there was a really loud noise." The juvenile-looking cat child space kitten shouted. "We thought the monster might have gotten you." The dad alien wandered over to the tent, briefly turning to glare at the three humans when realizing they were following him before turning his attention back on the space kitten. He placed a comforting hand on the kid's head, ruffling the fluffier fur there. "It's all right, kid. The issue's been taken care of." The kid looks startled at this, ears flying back up and rapidly looking around for the feathered reptile. "Wait, what? How? Where? What?" "Whoa there, it's fine. These new acquaintances of ours used some strange loud device to scare it off," says Dad Alien. "Who?" Their voice cuts off when their eyes land on the three of them, eyes wide in shock, quickly looking back at the dad in bewilderment. "What?" The dad's scarf starts floating again, and the kid stops talking, now looking nervous. Dad Alien, scarf no longer disobeying gravity, sighs loudly. "Why don't you update the others on the situation and bring them out here while I converse with our new allies? Try to keep them from making a ruckus, all right?" They lean in close to the kid's ear and whispers, still loud enough for 𝐬𝐻𝐸 to hear, though he doubts the other realizes that. "And tell them not to say anything." "About what?" 𝐬𝐻𝐸 wonders while watching this unfold, arm hooked around Yuuga's shoulders, while Izuku mutters behind unconsciously from them. The kid nods and goes back inside the tent, while Dad Alien 𝐬𝐻𝐸 really needs to ask for a name soon faces them. The shadow where his face should be giving away nothing as he gesture over to the side. "All right then, let's go talk over here, Dad Alien," or 𝐬𝐻𝐸, as he finally introduced himself after leading the three of them a few feet over from the tent to talk. Takes up a defensive posture at them and, supposedly, scowls. "What are you doing here all alone on a death world?" asks 𝐬𝐻𝐸 more than a little accusedly, straight to the point as usual. And with two children no less. Too fed up with this horrible day to deal with anyone's bullshit anymore, 𝐬𝐻𝐸 decides to be petty and throw the other's attitude back at him, grinning with his teeth on display. "Well, yo, why don't I ask what you're doing here by yourselves on a death world, if you can even call it that?" And with two children no less tilde, 𝐬𝐻𝐸 stiffens, leaning back and turning his head to the side in what 𝐬𝐻𝐸 chooses to decipher as submittance and not indifference. "Apologies," says the alien man. "That was rather aggressive of me to start off with. I apologize. So how did the three of you get here then?" "Well," 𝐬𝐻𝐸 starts, losing most of his unhinged smile as his temper is slowing satiated. "After our ship over there was damaged by an asteroid or some other space junk, we got thrown way off course from our route. We tried to warp back to where we were supposed to be going, but the calibration on the warp function must have malfunctioned because it threw us basically in the direct opposite direction. It worked the second time while we were looking for an 𝐸𝐸, but instead heading right for the planet, as it was intended, we accidentally crashed into a ship that was near here instead, messing up our own ship even more." 𝐬𝐻𝐸's eyes widens and 𝐬𝐻𝐸 is suddenly worried that he'd just screwed himself over with his rambling. He hadn't meant to let that last bit slip. Stupid social brain trying to ruin his life. However, the alien says nothing and simply nods, apparently unbothered by 𝐬𝐻𝐸's little slip-up. "My crew and myself escaped from an older modeled ship that had been holding us captive after a breach in some other part of the ship left us unguarded," he said, shocking 𝐬𝐻𝐸 and the two kids with the information. "Unfortunately, the escape pod we left in was also old and in worse quality than what would have been preferable, and the gravity of this planet is stronger than most, leaving us with no choice but to execute a controlled crash." "Yeah, we saw the wreckage on the way over here," says Izuku unexpectedly in, mostly, common, apparently already at a conclusion with whatever he was previously muttering about. "The smoke is mostly gone now." "Ah, that's good," says 𝐬𝐻𝐸 awkwardly. "Where's the ship you all got here in? You said it was nearby here, right?" "What? You didn't see it already? It's right over there." 𝐬𝐻𝐸 stopped suddenly after looking over to the right, where the ship was supposed to be. "What the fuck?" Izuku and Yuuga look over as well after seeing his reaction, immediately becoming utterly shocked and confused. The area where their ship had previously been is now empty with nothing but grass and dirt. No sign of the ship or where it had gone. 𝐬𝐻𝐸 just looks confused at their reactions, idly adjusting his hood to further cover his face, as tried to follow what the others were reacting to. "What are we looking at here exactly?" "Oh, nothing," says 𝐬𝐻𝐸, offhandedly. "That's kinda the problem. What? 𝐲𝐸 only looks more confused, brows scrunching under the hood, though the others couldn't see it. Nothing. Hisashi looks forlornly at where the ship he spent all of his potential retirement money on had once been. I'll tell you later, I think. Well, if it's nothing, then we should get back to our conversation. The star is close to coming down to its lowest peak in the sky already. Wait, shit, what? Hisashi cursed. Damn it. Did you and your kiddos want to camp out with us at the base we made? It's kinda shoddy, but it's better than out in an open field where anything could attack you without any cover. Ooh, 𝐲𝐸 scrunched his shoulders, not understanding several of whatever words the blonde man had just said. What's a camp? Why, you don't know what a camp is? Hisashi looked at him incredulously before thinking better of it and shaking his head. You know what? It's not that important. Just, do you want to stay with us or not? 𝐲𝐸 looked hesitant. Are you sure? It's more than just me and 2 kids, you know. There's also an adult 𝐴𝐵ian and 2 other children as well. It would be a huge burden on you and your own kids, who look even younger than most of my own. Holy shit, man, you just casually have 4 kids. Hisashi shouted, making 𝐲𝐸 wince from the volume. Space Kit also popped their head out the tent, holding the tiny one and being followed by a sheep-deer hybrid type alien, a bovidae if Hisashi's not mistaken. Actually it's fine. You guys won't be a burden at all, I swear it. We have plenty of space for your tent, and I'm sure it won't be too hard finding something for all of you to eat if we look around hard enough. If we're really lucky, we might even be able to share our rations with you all. 𝐲𝐸 looks a bit less hesitant, though still wary. Well, I suppose we might as well then. Many species find comfort in bigger numbers after all. The pink bovidae jumps forward and up and down in place, a bit waving their arms sporadically and almost hitting the cat kid. We're grouping up with our mystery saviors. It's just like in the movies. Is it gonna be like a sleepover? Do we get to have a cuddle pile? Calm down, Mina. We're just moving our shelter towards theirs, lectures 𝐲𝐸. Go tell Hawks and 𝐴𝐸 to get ready to leave, now. On it, Aizawa-sensei, Mina shouts before hurrying back into the tent. Oh wait, I thought your name was 𝐲𝐸, questions Hisashi. And are all your kids actually just your students? Most of them are, though Hitoshi is both, he says, tilting his head towards the lion child, who lifts a paw at them in greeting. And Aizawa is my pack name. Since my children have the same pack name as me, it would be dumb to have us all called that when we all have other individual names. Ah, that makes sense. That was my reason for introducing myself as Hisashi. Our pack name is Yamada. Hisashi nods, glancing at the 2 new aliens following the pink one out of the tent. The pink one, or Mina, he supposes, is struggling to carry some sort of shoulder purse bag thing, which 𝐲𝐸 quickly takes from her, earning a tired thanks from the girl. Hisashi helps 𝐲𝐸 take the tent apart, and soon starts to lead them back to his and kids' campsite, only sending one last conflicted look back to where his ship had once been before continuing onward for good. They make it to the campsite with a little bit of daylight still left, making the hassle of putting the tent up a little less difficult than it could have been, but no less strenuous in the end. The harsh gravity of this cursed planet is not doing well for himself or his students. Hawks in particular looks just about ready to collapse where he's standing. Hisashi helps him put up the tent with little difficulty, which does admittedly impress 𝐲𝐸 just a little bit, considering before today, the man has probably never even seen this model of portable shelters. From the corner of his vision, he can see his 4 kids standing near Hisashi's own, as the 2 of they show his their own much larger tent and the weird pile beside it. Though only the green one seems to actually be talking. The blonde one just kind of follows behind, holding a small fuzzy thing, and occasionally saying something to the green one in a language that 𝐲𝐸 can't understand. Hisashi walks up and stands close next to him when they finish setting up, bumping their shoulders together with a happy tilt to his lips and eyes squinted upward a little bit. Any more important business, buddy? If not, I can grab some bedding from the kids and I's tent. We brought extras just in case it got really cold on the ship or something. I don't mind giving you guys some though. 𝐲𝐸's face flushed from the thought of Hisashi giving 𝐲𝐸 his bedding to keep him warm, suddenly even more glad that his face is mostly covered. He hears Hawks laugh at him as his shoulders tense, it being pretty obvious to the bird hero what direction his thoughts went. He mentally chides himself, this is no time for that, especially since Hisashi definitely did not mean it like that. He isn't even offering it to him specifically anyway. If anything, he's just being an attentive and responsible adult, and looking out for the younglings he has offered to be partially responsible for when he invited them over. He clears his throat awkwardly. Yes, please, thank you 𝐻𝐡𝐢𝐬. You are very kind. The blonde man chuckles, doing a weird up and down motion with his shoulders in a manner 𝐲𝐻𝐢 doesn't know how to interpret. Well, just goes to show that the HSCP doesn't always know what they're talking about. Huh. What does that mean, Kiro? Says 𝐬𝐡𝐢𝐬, a webbed finger brought to her face with her head tilted in curiosity, causing them both a minor flinch, though 𝐲𝐻𝐢 definitely hides it better. Still, 𝐲𝐻𝐢 hadn't even noticed them walk over. He reasons that all the constant stress and chaos must be making him sloppy. Hisashi looks confused, face scrunched up in a way that 𝐲𝐻𝐢 really shouldn't think is cute, especially given the fact that he has just met this man. Well, don't you know what me and the kids are? The HSCP hates us. They refuse to even label us sapient. Despite all our claims against them, they just keep making excuses. 𝐲𝐻𝐢 makes eye contact with his students by accident. They're all looking at him. Hawks, however, suspiciously, avoids his gaze entirely. Well, what are you? 𝐲𝐻𝐢 says warily. His shoulders are up to his chin at this rate. Thank the stars for his scarf. Well, we are from Terra. We're Terrans. Though we ourselves typically call our planet Earth, not Terra, Hisashi mutters off. 𝐲𝐻𝐢's eyes widen, and he takes an involuntary step back, as do his students, all displaying different levels of shock and/or panic. You mean the deathworlders that decimated one of the most feared conquerors in the galaxy? Cries Mina, the reminder of the incident only causing more panic. Hisashi and the green kid look extremely crestfallen at the sudden fear and lack of trust towards them, the green one looking almost close to tears. Even the smaller blonde looks upset, and 𝐲𝐻𝐢 is pretty sure they can't even understand what is being said. 𝐲𝐻𝐢 shakes his head, arms crossing as he moves to stand beside them once more, head down. That's enough, Mina. It's not logical to be encouraging needless fear towards the people that just saved us. Clearly, the HSCP's data on the Terrans are extremely biased. Do they look bloodthirsty and violent to you? 𝐲𝐻𝐢 sighs, ignoring the wide, wobbly smile sent tearfully his way by Hisashi. He wills away the heat in his cheeks. I know I taught you kids better than to mindlessly listen to others' words, especially when there's actual proof going against what they're saying. Everyone seems to calm down at his words, no longer looking ready to bolt at the first sign of aggressiveness. He almost falls onto his back when a sudden weight is pushed on him, arms hooked around his shoulders and a face pressed into his neck. He can hear the startled yelps of his students, and he strains to see them past Hisashi's shiny blonde hair. The green child makes an almost panicked noise and hurriedly explains to the others that Hisashi's just hugging him. It's what Terrans do to show affection with those they care about. 𝐲𝐻𝐢's face flushes a vibrant red as he shakily brings his arms to wrap around the blonde's lithe frame, mirroring the blonde's motions and stance, his hands resting on the other's back, feeling the blonde's spine through his thin clothes. Hisashi nuzzles into his neck, a little uncomfortably with the way that the blonde's eye coverage things were digging into him. 𝐲𝐻𝐢's scarf slowly growing wetter, presumably from Hisashi's tears, if the loud, shaky breaths are anything to go by. The blonde doesn't cling much longer though, pulling back with a wide grin and wiping at his eyes with his hands. Sorry. I just haven't had people stand up for me very often before. Especially not someone who barely knows me. It just got to me more than I thought it would. Seriously man, so sorry. 𝐲𝐻𝐢 averts his gaze, still pink in the face. He can see his students freely now, thankfully looking more amused than concerned now. Though both Hawks and his son are looking a bit too cheeky for his own comfort. He notices Hawks still looks a bit uneasy behind his joking display. If anything, he looks even more guilty than before somehow. It's fine, he coughs out before clearing his throat. I'm glad you find me a trustable enough person for you to show affection so freely. Though, next time, a little warning would be nice. Oh, of course, Hisashi grins, eyes shining something fierce. I will definitely do that. You can just call me Warning Man. Haha. What? Never mind. Ha. Hisashi slaps his hands together for no apparent reason. Okay, now, any more important business before we all head off to bed? Oh right, Hawks is still injured. 𝐲𝐻𝐢 deadpans. Wait, oh shit really? Why didn't you say something? I'll go get my med kit. Even after the sun goes down and everyone has already gone to bed, Izuku finds that no matter what position he squirms into, he still can't get himself to fall asleep. His mind is too busy racing with curiosity and leftover adrenaline that had yet to fully fade for whatever reason. Eventually his shifting gets so bad that he accidentally kicks Yuuga in the side, the blonde child instantly groaning in annoyance and sitting up in their sleeping bag. Stop squirming like a drowning worm before you wake up, Dad. And he decides he needs lectures us about how important sleep is while making that disappointed dad face with his arms crossed while he shakes his head at us. They whisper yell at the broccoli lookalike child with a hard glare that's half anger, half inability to see in the dark. I don't want to have to sit through that again. Calm down, Izuku whisper yells back. I'm not that dumb. I just can't sleep. My brain feels like it's filled with moths, and they all think my thoughts are a fancy 19s vintage lampshade. That is a horrible description, and if Dad heard that he would disown you immediately. Shut up, it's accurate. Izuku wiggles out of his sleeping bag, making Yuuga squint harder over at him suspiciously. What on not earth are you doing? I'm going on a walk to clear my head, says Izuku, carefully opening the tent flap after grabbing a flashlight from his bag, thankfully not tripping on the young weasels. Then I'll just go to bed like normal, and then there won't be any problems. By yourself? Are you actually crazy? Yuuga quickly wiggled out of their bag to chase after him. Do you know how grounded you'd be if he found out you went off on your own in the middle of the night, while on a planet we know nothing about? You know, the planet that the aliens called a literal death world. Do you know how grounded I would be for actively letting you? It'll be fine. Izuku shuffled through the opening before Yuuga could get to him, hopping out of reach when they come barreling out after him, arm outstretched to tackle. You can just come with me. Then he can't get mad at us for being all alone because we'd have each other. He literally forbade the two of us from going anywhere with just the two of us earlier today. How did you already forget that? What's that? Sorry, I can't hear you. My hearing is too horrible and shitty, calls Izuku, already running out the gate. Hope I don't get eaten by some monster I can't hear. Izuku, shouts Yuuga, giving chase. I'm going to actually break your kneecaps for this. And I'm telling Dad you were cussing. As if you tell him I cussed, then you'll have to tell him why, and then he'll know we went out by ourselves. He says, jumping over a log and sprinting towards the direction of the alien escape pod with a lack of anywhere else familiar to walk to. Yuuga sprints after him, desperate to not get stuck in the dark since they hadn't had the time to grab their own flashlight. Slow down, you overgrown shrub. The blonde child chokes out through wheezing breaths. I'm not made for exercising. The last physical thing I did was copy the magical girl transformation dances from TV, and you know it. Why would I know that? I know you know it because I saw you filming it. Don't lie to me, broccoli boy. I'm telling Dad you called me names again. If you do that, you'll have to tell Dad you went out, you donut. Oh yeah, Izuku says, slowly coming to a stop in front of the wrecked escape pod. Yuuga soon jogging up next to him, wheezing loudly and holding their stomach. Oh, oh, you'll feel better soon, probably. It's fine, says Izuku, walking up to the broken vessel. He shines the flashlight on it, feeling sort of like one of those vloggers that go on nighttime adventures in stereotypically haunted places. Ooh, doesn't it look a lot cooler at night? If you mean terrifying, then I definitely agree with you. This is horrible, I hate it. And you for that matter for dragging me out here, mumbled Yuuga, looking around the two of them nervously. Every little noise keeps making them jump and their skin crawl. You're just scared because you don't like the dark. Izuku shoves the flashlight into his hands. There. Now you won't be as nervous because you hold all the light. Nope, I'm still scared. Well, can you be scared over here then? I want to see the inside. Yuuga hesitates before following behind Izuku, warily glancing behind them every so often. They feel as if several eyes are watching them from the dark, and they curse the fact that neither of them brought a weapon. Ooh, come here, shine it on the control panel. I want to read it. Coming. They bring the light over to shine on the controls. At least they feel somewhat safer inside the off-putting metal contraption than they did in the very dark woods. Izuku starts muttering, hands flying out to touch all the little buttons and feel the symbols on his fingertips. He rattles all the gears and flips every switch he can find to see what sound it makes. He looks around underneath too, opening the cupboard underneath, which is disappointingly empty. He reaches his hands up to touch the cracked glass of the screen, only to realize that it's actually just clear plastic. Wow, aliens aren't environmentally efficient, huh? Even Earth has mostly stopped using plastic nowadays. What the heck? Well, you said that the suspicious guy that Dad was all awkward with said that the ship they were being held in was an old model, right? Supplied Yuuga questioningly. Maybe they actually did, just after this thing was made. I hope so, plastic sucks. Izuku pries a panel off from the underside of the dashboard and stares hungrily at the wires. How mad do you think Dad would be if I got electrocuted? Izuku, no. Izuku, yes. He sticks his hand through the wires and fiddles with a little toggle thing. Izuku, I swear to. I wonder what this does. Izuku, who is now Yuuga's least favorite sibling, says before immediately pressing down on it. The crack to hell and back screen flickers before turning on, entirely white with colored little rectangles on the side areas where it turns black like on a phone with a broken screen. The comms that he didn't even realize were there come to life as well, crackling in and out of focus with whistled noises occasionally breaking through the static. Symbols flashing brightly pop up on the screen. The wires start to make his hand feel buzzy, and he yanks his hand out quickly before it actually electrocutes him. He backs away straight into Yuuga, who stares wordlessly at the glowing screen that lights up the whole room with an artificial glow, jaw wide open. We should probably leave this and go now, right? Before we actually get in trouble. Izuku mumbles, the noise and light making him feel uneasy. Yeah, let's go. I don't even want to know what the light from this thing is going to attract, says Yuuga following Izuku out of the pod. Briefly, they shine the light towards the ground only to go pale and stiff, weakly whispering at Izuku. What? What is it? What's wrong? Izuku says concerned after hearing his name. He follows where the light is pointed and goes pale as well. Those clawed footprints weren't there when they first got there less than 10 minutes ago. Should we run? Definitely run. Hisashi wakes up with a massive headache, immediately setting his day off to a horrible start. His more anxious side yelling at him that this is clearly some sort of bad luck that's been cursed upon him, and that he's going to be struck by lightning the second he walks outside. With the throbbing behind his eyes and skull, he's more than willing to give in to that delusion, if only for a bit longer, if it gives him a valid excuse to relax more. Instead of getting up and being productive, he lazily puts in his hearing aids and flips over onto his back, turning his blurry gaze to the ceiling and listening to the morning nature ambience coming in from outside. It's a similar comfort to as it is on Earth, with just a few odd discrepancies. The chirping and warbling of the birds aren't right, and the buzzing of insects are loud and disturbing, making his skin itch even from inside the tent. At least the sounds of his snoring children next to him are able to bring him some familiar comfort. If he were to focus hard enough, he might even be able to convince himself that he was just resting at home or on the ship with them, traveling the stars to go visit his parental figures at their retirement-based vacation villa on some random Jupiter moon called Europa or something, and not on some random planet in the middle of fuck knows where with dinosaurs and orphan weasels whose parent he accidentally killed. And weirdly nice alien people that actually laughed when he was telling a joke last night. Honestly, the joke wasn't even a very funny one. It's too bad most good jokes he knows are Earth context-based, or it'd be a real laughing riot. He lays there until a stream of light from the half-closed netted window strikes him in the face and temporarily blinds him. He's almost glad for it though, in the same way he was glad to have a really annoying flashing alarm back home that gave him a headache every morning, but did effectively wake him up better than anything else he'd ever owned. As much as he'd love to spend the rest of his days moping in his sleeping bag and mourning his old mundane as far as anyone else is concerned life, he can already hear the sounds of their new alien buddies moving around outside, probably bored out of their minds with nothing to do. And hungry, most likely. He slips his glasses onto his face, successfully not poking himself in the eye this time, and goes through what little of his morning routine that he's still capable of completing, brushing his hair, changing into clothes that don't smell like dirt, etc. He takes a moment to give the baby weasel things squirming near the kids' sleeping bags some grass-like plant from the baggie before scooping some of the rations he'd been keeping in the tent into his bag and heading out to greet the others. Unfortunately, the only things they have available were jerky, veggie chips, and very basic nutritional bars that lack any good flavors. But it's not like beggars can be choosers, he supposes. Plus, he'd picked up that fruit yesterday that looks promising, so if all else fails, he at least has a potential backup option. He spots Xiaoda's 3 older kids peeking through he and kids' supplies in the wagon. But they don't look very suspicious, and Hitoshi even raises a paw at him with a positive expression on his face when they notice him looking at them. Maybe Izuku told them they could look through it if they wanted. Or he'd forgotten some miscellaneous space custom, and just so happened to be unable to recall it for whatever reason. He pays them little mind and instead wanders over to the fire pit, where Hawks and 𝐲𝐸 sit on the improvised rock chairs he had drug over before. The littlest alien Hizashi hadn't really been paying much attention to until now lays comfortably in the cloaked alien's arms, tiny goat-like head resting softly on his shoulder, face half covered beneath the off-white scarf. Hizashi whistles sharply for their attention, the poor bird man doing a whole body flinch at the noise and looking at Hizashi with wide eyes, and the blonde is suddenly very nervous about what he just blurted out in bird language. He smiles nervously without teeth at the two of them, now that he has their attention, and shifts the food in his arms in order to draw attention to it. Thankfully, seeing the contents of his arms wipes their previous stiffness away, and they perk up excitedly, or what he thinks is excitedly anyway. He doesn't even know what the cloaked alien is at all, much less that species' body language. "Hey friends," he says as he walks over to stand beside 𝐲𝐸 and crouches down to sit on the ground next to them, only feeling slightly dizzy from the action. "These are some of each kind of ration we have available right now, though I am pretty sure there's at least a few wild things we could eat around here too should the need arise." He places each item separately from each other, so the two of them could see them better, and continue speaking. "Here we have some dried plant chips with no additional seasonings added, some jerky, which I'm pretty sure has salt or something on it more than likely, and the least bland brand of nutritional bars I was able to find at the market for a semi-decent price. Unfortunately, the only thing with more than one option is the chips, and there's only 3 types of those. But hopefully this should be good enough for the time being until we can find something here that you guys can eat. I already know of a couple possible types of plants that may yet be edible, though I haven't actually gone out to look for any yet." He holds out one of the bags of chips for 𝐲𝐸 to grab and inspect, which he does with his one free hand for a few seconds before handing it back to Hizashi. "These will have to do, I guess," 𝐲𝐸 grumbles. "The only food we have is a couple jelly packs and a couple packets of dried powdered grains that need water to eat anyway. Neither will last us long with so many of us." "Hey, at least the herbivores have plenty of options here." Hawks gestures towards the child sleeping on 𝐲𝐸. "Sure, the amount of food might seem discouraging, but in the end only 2 of our group actually need plant matter to live for any distinct amount of time, and the rest of us will hopefully be able to catch a small animal to eat or something. Meat doesn't have the same worries of it being poisonous that plants have." Hizashi frowns at the bird's sure tone and squints a bit. "Well, that's not entirely true, yo. Most bugs aren't safe to eat, and birds and other animals are all capable of having diseases or other bad things that we have to watch out for. Grabbing some random animal isn't going to be much safer when we don't know how to properly prepare it." Hawks and 𝐲𝐸 look at him appalled, Hawk's eyes as wide as flying saucers, and he assumes 𝐲𝐸's are about the same. 𝐲𝐸 breaks his previously stern character and shudders in disbelief. "Meat can be poisonous." Hizashi's taken aback by their demeanors, leaning back a bit and looking at them in confusion. Yeah, like I said, it's mostly just insects, but a lot of other meat can be inedible too depending on the circumstances. Cooking it usually fixes it though. You guys have poisonous meat and your solution to this is just making it hot," Hawk says skeptically. "If you guys know that eating something is going to kill you, then why would your reaction to that be maybe making it hot will fix it? That's 𝐀𝐦 messed up." "Oi, no swearing in front of 𝐸𝐸, 𝐲𝐸 glares. "Yeah, Hawks, be more considerate of the baby," Hizashi says with a grin. "And for your information, most meat isn't literally poisonous. It can just carry bacteria and stuff that isn't good for our bodies and can make us sick when it's raw. Cooking the bad stuff out is honestly just a bonus though. The main part is that meat just generally tends to taste better and is easier to digest when cooked. It's logical." "Let's not argue about this right now," 𝐲𝐸 raises a hand up between them to end the conversation. "Our priority right now is just making sure we have food to eat. We should do a short test to see if our group is able to consume any of the terrans. No point in planning on relying on using it if we can't actually eat it anyway." "Good idea, 𝐲𝐸." Hizashi tapped the man's knee with his hand a few times before standing back up. "I'll go bring the kiddos over, and then we can figure out what else needs to be done and stuff." "Sounds good." 𝐲𝐸 awkwardly pats Hizashi on the arm before he's able to walk away. "Tell Hitoshi while you're over there that he shouldn't be trying on other species' hats. It's bad for his mane." Hizashi looks over to see the purple cat child trying and failing to get one of Hizashi's floral print sun hats to sit comfortably on his fluffy head, his claws digging into the fabric of the stiff flat part while trying to pull it down. "Wah hey," Hizashi yelps. "Put that down. That hat was my grandma's." Okay listeners, ears focused, announced Hizashi to the small group in front of him, gathered around the fire pit. We need to establish our food options here in order to prolong our survival on this planet for as long as we can, until help arrives from your side of people back home. He gestures for Aizawa, who dutifully stands next to him, to lift the rations he had decided to have the man hold for his presentation, in hopes that the kiddos would find the prospect of eating them less threatening if 𝐲𝐸 was being actively associated with it. We'll test each food item by giving each of you a little bit of each, and if nothing bad happens in the next day or so, we'll give you a larger portion, then so see if that makes any difference in the matter. Don't worry though, we'll be keeping an eye out on you guys in case anything goes wrong. A fluffy hand pops up. Well, me and Aries species can't really eat meat or anything that is too high in protein, so I kinda doubt we'd be able to eat anything other than the chips, 𝐸 supplies helpfully. There's not really much of a point even testing the other two since we already know that. Also, I'm fine with testing the chips for me and 𝐸𝐸, so we won't have to worry about trying to give Aries any before we're sure. 𝐲𝐸 nods gratefully. Thank you 𝐸. That's a very brave choice for you to take upon yourself. That kind of attitude will undoubtedly help you later in your career as a hero. 𝐸 looks ecstatic at the praise and Hitoshi gapes enviously. Even Frog Girl looks a little jealous. Guess 𝐲𝐸 doesn't hand out praise very often. Doesn't he know children need constant reassurance and appraisal for their good deeds in order to mentally develop a healthy balance of self-worth, and to know that they're respected as a person? Hizashi will have to mention that to him at a later date in case he was unaware, and then have a longer talk of a different kind if he was. Well, if we're going off about our dietary needs, Hitoshi starts, rather enthusiastically for the usually subdued child. My species is about the opposite of 𝐸. We need a high-protein diet and can't digest most plants provided by HSCP. And what we can eat is only in smaller amounts. Same here, Ribbit, says Frog Girl, who Hizashi really needs to find the name of. Hizashi hadn't really considered the fact that most species in space were typically either herbivores or carnivores, with omnivores being pretty rare. At least that makes it easier to test things both now and in the future. Okay, so, Hizashi takes the snacks back from 𝐲𝐸. I'm gonna give each of you a little, but of each type you guys are able to eat, and we'll see how your bodies react later I guess. We'll have to be more careful with those of you that eat plants, since plants are more likely to contain toxins that some species can't have. So we'll have a longer watch period for those people just in case. He opens a jerky packet and hands a piece to Hitoshi and Sue before looking back at the other two adults, holding up a piece to them questioningly. 𝐲𝐸 nods and takes the jerky, and Hawks does so as well, though with much higher suspicion/skepticism than 𝐲𝐸. Okay, you guys can start eating that now. He now takes one of each chip and gives those to 𝐸, and then to 𝐲𝐸 and Hawks, again, the only two omnivores apparently. Hizashi decides to wait until later to try them on the nutritional bars in case it messes up the data for the other two factors, and make them have to retake the tests if someone ends up getting sick later. Though, thankfully, no one seems to have any bad reactions to anything, and the test comes to a peaceful conclusion for the time being. Hopefully his own trying of those fruits he found before will go similarly when he finally gets around to it. Well then, looks like we're done here. Hizashi waves the kiddos off with a smile now that there's no more reason for them to be standing around here doing nothing. You three can get back to whatever it is you were doing earlier. Just don't touch my hats anymore, you dig? As the kids disperse back to whatever they were doing before, Hizashi turns to Hawks, expression changing to fit to that of what was taught during his previous medical training, professional and inviting. So how's your head been since last night? Were the wrappings too tight or uncomfortable during the night or anything? Any itching or pulsing in the area around the wound? Ooh, I don't think so. I haven't had any issues that aren't obvious, though my leg has been pretty sore since I've had to put pressure on it when walking. The bird man replies. Hizashi frowns. He had kind of forgotten about the leg honestly, head wound having taken priority. Well, don't worry too hard. I'm sure we can find a few good sticks to make you some crutches. Hizashi reassures with a grin. He turns to 𝐲𝐸. Do you mind watching over the camp for me while I go out to look for some good branches for it? I'll probably take 𝐸𝐸 with me and check the traps too, since I'd already be going out around there. Well, that's logical I suppose, says 𝐲𝐸 awkwardly. Are you sure about leaving one of your kids alone with a bunch of strangers? He looks pretty small. I wouldn't think either of them would be old enough to be on their own yet. Oh, I'm not too worried about that. He is pretty young, sure, and I'm always going to be anxious about leaving them alone. But I have full faith in Izuku. He's the more rambunctious one out of the two, and he has the strength to back it, and the smarts. Plus, I'm pretty sure he has a taser somewhere if he really needs to defend himself, though I haven't been able to figure out where he puts it. Hisashi takes the leftover snacks from 𝐲𝗏 and begins to move towards the tent to wake up Yuuga. He waves a hand over his shoulder as he calls back to 𝐲𝗏. See ya later, 𝐲𝗏. We'll be back before the sun hits the top of the sky. Hisashi and Yuuga walk along the nature trail. Towards the traps Hisashi has been putting off on resetting for a while now, Hisashi leading the way. Suo, how do you feel about all that's been going on since yesterday? I know I haven't really had time to ask you too how you feel lately, Hisashi asks Yuuga, pivoting his head around to look at the preteen as he continues walking forward, trusting the other to tell him if he's about to walk into a tree or something since he's not watching where he's going. Yuuga takes a moment to consider, looking around aimlessly and kicking a small rock on the ground out of the path they're walking on. They pause an extra second longer to think before looking back up to their dad, who continues to watch them patiently as they both walk forward. Well, I'm honestly not too sure. Getting stuck here was already a pretty scary thing to happen. And now there's aliens that we know essentially nothing about living right next to us. And with them being here, it puts us at a higher chance of us dying of starvation just so that they don't starve. And, it's kind of fun, but I just wish there weren't such high stakes. Yeah, that's fair, kiddo. He turns around fully to draw Yuuga in close, ruffling their hair with a soft smile on his face. You're doing a great job so far, bud. I'm not sure when our lives will start going back to normal, or if this will become our normal, but I promise that I'll be here looking out for you. Yuuga sniffles, tearing up, and hides their face in Hisashi's shoulder. Thanks, Dad. Of course, buddy. Now let's get back to business. Those traps aren't going to check themselves. All right, surprisingly, they actually managed to catch something in the traps. Nothing great, of course, for how small the trap is, just a small rodent-like creature, similar in appearance to a squirrel, but a bit fatter and with a raccoon-striped tail. Unfortunately, he hadn't really considered the possibility of them actually catching anything in the flimsy branch drop trap he haphazardly built when they got here. He figured it would just be a good excuse to take an occasional walk every now and then, not something he'd actually have to deal with. It makes him almost regret taking Yuuga with him, his animal-loving, sweet-hearted kid who would most definitely break down into tears if he even mentioned the possibility of eating the damn thing. What's worse is that the little pest isn't even trying to escape or anything. It's just sitting there, eating the bait leaves, not minding his presence in the slightest. He's not sure how he's going to play this off in a way that'll keep Yuuga from freaking out, but also let him take it back for the others, who rely on having a steady supply of food in order to survive, and not eat all their rations. He decides to play it up like he would to a younger child, dramatically, and as usual, like an idiot. Though, the minor headache and disorientation also doesn't help. Wow, look at that. We actually caught something. Hisashi snatches the mostly empty gym sack from his backpack and shoves the faux squirrel in before Yuuga can say or see anything and fastens the now, only mildly, squirming gym sack to the side of his back, tying the top closed securely. Now we can bring this back to the others, and we can finally see how well our more carnivorous friends take to this planet's meat. We can even show them how to properly cook it over a fire. Doesn't that sound fun? He whips his head around to Yuuga excitedly, and Yuuga takes a step back, looking nervous rather than relieved like he had hoped. Whoops. Guess his excited and happy face came off as a bit more manic than he'd meant it to. As per usual, he forces his face to calm, relaxing his eyebrows and shrinking his smile down to socially acceptable levels. Sorry, panicked. Once again, Hisashi mentally slaps himself. Let's go head back. I'm sure the others will be excited to hear the good news. Probably. Yuuga glances down at the now rigorously writhing gym bag nervously. Are you sure it's a good idea to let it stay like that? I always thought it was best to end the prey you're hunting when you catch it so it's not just suffering meaninglessly. Oh, it seems Hisashi's misunderstood the root of their nerves. Shit. Yeah, but he decides to just go with the truth. I just didn't want you to have to see me kill some poor critter. You and Izuku are always so lovey-dovey with most animals. I don't want to traumatize you too badly at your young age, you know. It's my job as your parent to protect you from stuff like that. That's fair, I guess. Yuuga looks down at the bag again. Still feels wrong to torment it like this, just to kill it later anyways. Don't worry, kiddo, I'll take care of it as soon as we get back, okay? He points into the distance, where the tied-up wooden fence can be seen, as well as Izuku and some of the other kids can be seen sitting next to the Earthling's tent. Look, we're almost there. Soon we'll be eating some fresh meat stew or something, and our unfortunate squirrel friend won't have to suffer for too much longer. The blonde child glares up at him from behind their droopy bangs, but doesn't elaborate further, just turning their head to stare at the ground. Hisashi feels horrible. He wishes he had just put the damn thing out of its misery, or something when they'd found it, instead of his stupid elaborate plan that didn't even work. Maybe he just needs to stop trying so hard to be a good father. His kids won't be kids for too much longer anyway. Maybe it's about time he lets them grow up more. The two of them make it to the swivel gate, and Yuuga is quick to march over to where Izuku and the others are sitting, not even glancing in Hisashi's direction. Hisashi simply sighs and heads over to the fire pit to begin the process of preparing the meat. He sets the bag down for a moment before grabbing the rest of the supplies he needs from the wagon. He quickly realizes he's going to need a water source as well and decides to take everything down to the stream and prepare it there instead, away from everyone else. He groans loudly as he plops down a bit more suddenly than he had meant to, and is hit with a sudden bout of dizziness that had been lingering throughout the day, and is now exponentially worse. His head pulses, and he rubs his temples with a groan. What a horrible day. He can barely concentrate on his work now, through the pain. He goes through all the motions of killing and skinning and gutting the alien squirrel, as if he were watching someone else do it on a live stream. His mind too foggy and disorganized to properly function. It's just his luck that he cuts his hand with the knife he was using to separate the fatty meat from the skin, and he hears himself hiss softly, though it felt more like he was hearing it from someone else's ears, or someone else's headphones that had the volume up too high. He holds his head with his only good hand for a moment before letting it drop again. He can't even concentrate on the blood running down his arm and sliding down and off his elbow as he holds his injured hand up to his face. His dizziness is worse now. When had his head gotten so bad? He's felt it. What he can now almost recognize as symptoms, occasionally throughout his day, and even before then maybe, but now he can barely keep himself from falling over. A major difference from now to then. He sets the knife, the meat, and the wooden board to the side where the ground looks relatively flat compared to the rest, and stands up. He wobbles, but stays upright, and he walks himself back up the soft incline and through the gate and to the tent, where the first aid kit sits undirtied on top of a discarded pile of clothes. When had he last used it for it to be sitting on top of anything? He feels someone grab his shoulder, saying his name, but he ignores it. He needs to bandage his hand before it gets infected or something. Who knows what was in the water that he was cleaning the knife off with, or the blood for that matter. He sits down where he was standing and holds his uninjured hand to his head again. It hurts enough that he can barely think straight. Someone whines distantly in the outskirts of his hearing, but he can't make out who. Is he disturbing the children? He hadn't meant to, though he knows he must look a downright wreck. He hopes Yuuga doesn't think it's their fault. They didn't fuck up his head. He did. Or maybe it was the crash. His head wound stopped bleeding yesterday, so he's completely forgotten his concussion. Is forgetfulness a sign of concussion? How long had he been going on like this? Someone grabs the box from where it lies in front of him and grabs his arm. They wipe the blood away and spray something that strings onto his wound. The pain brings him momentarily back to the present, and he sees that it's Izuku in front of him. His own kid being forced to see his only parental figure like this, and having to clean his wounds. This is supposed to be Hisashi's job. He is failing as a parent. The other children stand behind and around the green-haired boy. They're asking him questions and Izuku looks guilty. He wishes he could stop feeling so dizzy and heavy so he could tell them to knock it off. The grip on his shoulder tightens as Izuku starts to wrap his hand, and he looks up into the eyes of 𝐲𝐸, his new friend that he embarrassed himself in front of yesterday. Was his reaction then caused by his concussion too? That moment had been where he had really started to feel the dizziness kick in, he thinks. Though it could have also been the moment where he went racing through the woods to save his kids after they had started blowing that whistle. Had he messed himself up with that? He must have. It makes the most sense. He should have been resting, not sprinting through the trees at max speed and tripping on loose tree roots. He focuses back on 𝐲𝐸's eyes, the only thing he can see with how much fabric the other covers himself in. His eyes are beautiful and dark and almost human. Hisashi's eyes shut. and he finds himself falling backwards into the man's legs, thinking maybe now he can finally rest his tired head for more than just a few minutes.